In an abandoned area, a man tried to remove his collar and hoped it would not explode. Upon seeing that the collar in his hand had not gone off, he crushed it and declared that the kid earlier was right. His hair turned white as he declared that the collar was finally gone. With this, he felt power surging through his veins. He also confirmed that he was different from the rest of those worthless superhumans, so he showcased his ability and exclaimed that this was the power of a god. But before he could fully release it, someone intercepted him from above. When he looked up, he saw a guy descending rapidly with a catcher. The guy hurled it forward, and he was immediately trapped inside it. While restrained, he asked how the squad came so quickly, and told him to let go. However, the guy said he would not, as that was the result of removing the collar. He also said he was a threat now, and the man shouted he was a foolish mortal. He even threatened he would regret this, but a gunshot echoed next. Later, the guy reported he captured the superhuman with the broken collar, but when asked if he followed procedure, he was confused, thinking he only had to tranquilize. He was then scolded and told to read the handbook. He began flipping through the pages, asking where the procedures were. Just then, he found 2 pages stuck together. He quickly opened them, and was stunned to see how many steps there were. As he continued reading, he commented that the typesetting was terrible, but he was told to stop complaining and to check the explosive type man. However, he grew horrified, asking if glowing eyes and mouth were strange. He added that they were getting brighter and asked what it meant. The captain then ordered the others to fall back, while he simply wished him luck. Hearing this, he asked in horror what that meant, but the explosion soon engulfed him. Afterwards, the surrounding area was reduced to rubble, but the guy still managed to open his eyes and realized that he had survived. Thus, he could not help but think about how powerful his super strength was. But then his stomach rumbled, and this guy Wade was a superhuman in a superhuman era. 60 years ago, a disaster struck a Donghai Sea city, as train passengers sat unaware. At that time, 2 girls noticed a report of mysterious lights across the horizon. Suddenly, one of them turned and quickly confirmed that it was real. The other girl stared at it and thought it was truly beautiful, but her companion called her name when she noticed her hair turning white. At the same time, the man nearby them began coughing. They were shocked to see him suddenly breathe out blue fire. Soon, the train was filled with terrified screams. Not long after the train exploded, the girl named Lana survived the explosion and began crying. But she was stunned when she opened her eyes next. She realized that she was floating in the air. She then stared at the wrecked train, wondering if she was truly flying. As soon as she confirmed it, she began to test her ability. She even excitedly soared into the clouds. But later, the city was filled with dead bodies. Police even found a corpse disfigured, since the red flash gave her flight, but she rose too high. Later, they learned the red flash was a burst of light sweeping the horizon. Following it were superhumans with white hair and red eyes bringing ruin. Some emitted rays and some set buildings ablaze. Meanwhile, mind readers ended their lives together. Horrifying events rose and superpowers became humanity's curse. After it, the superhumans kept rising, and disasters worsened, forcing people to flee. Because of this, superhumans could only look at themselves and question what they had done to deserve such a fate, as their powers spiraled out of control. Soon, the struggle of humans and superhumans escalated to wars. In the end, tension collapsed into chaos as superhumans refused to yield. Humanity hunted them as they erased most lives, and their flaws led to defeat. Still, both sides fell into despair, and together forged a new order. At the cleanup crew dormitory, the building had already collapsed into rubble. A massive explosion followed, and from the debris, a hand suddenly emerged. 5 hours earlier, Wade was glad to find the same cup noodles he would savor later. At 6, Wade's powers were deemed dangerous, so he became a cleaner for 15 years. All he did was work diligently and dedicate his life to serving others. Over time, he even found himself enjoying the work. After delivering the last cart, the captain even said having him was convenient. Later, while resting, he recalled how superpowers were condemned and tied to perilous labor. With that thought, he kept resting and bid farewell while the captain left early. Yet he continued to think about how their collar decided their life and death. Just then, a woman appeared with children, introducing him as a superhuman. He then watched as she told the children to give him what they prepared. So the children all spoke at once, saying he had worked hard. She then said superhumans atoned with tireless labor and must never be mistreated. But after handing their gifts, she left with the children, reminding them to sanitize. Wade, who's now filled with food, still could not help but exclaim that he had hit the jackpot. However, he soon heard someone shouting about an order, and he turned his head. He then saw a delivery man suddenly fly past him, which caused his food to scatter across the ground. A passerby even ended up trampling it. Nevertheless, he casually searched his coat and took out a plastic bag. Then, he began picking up the packaged food. After finishing, he left waving the bag high, claiming it was the best. He continued singing to himself along the way, until he reached the dormitory. There he saw his colleague Anton and asked him to guess what he had found. In response, Anton raised his food packet and Wade noted he had some too. So he cheerfully said they were both lucky, and Anton casually agreed. After Wade's goodbye, Anton entered the room, repeating their luck. He dropped his belongings and slumped down, thinking the people fed them expired scraps. So he clutched his collar and cried, believing naive ones like Wade were truly fortunate. Meanwhile, Wade happily opened his cabinet. Then he excitedly took out his chicken cup noodles. He even hugged it, thinking he'd never taste a citizen's food in his life. After it, he began reading its instructions, needing 3 minutes in hot water. So he busied himself with boiling water. Anton listened as Wade cheerfully sang about his cup noodles. Suddenly, he made a fork float to him and was instantly detected. He stared at the fork, envying Wade, who lived in false happiness. As he thought Wade's illusion would soon shatter, he moved the fork and was warned. He was notified the termination protocol was approved and now active. His eyes then widened as he felt his collar tighten. The walls soon began to crumble, and Wade looked around in confusion. Just then he was struck in the face by a basin, and the entire building began to explode. At that moment, Anton sensed the space and the energy in him, but his thoughts were cut off as his room collapsed around him. He looked up as everything crumbled. Suddenly, he began coughing up blood. He felt power surge from his blood and wondered if it was his collar-free ability. Just then, the floor beneath him shattered. He quickly clung to the chair overhead and thought this power really meant disaster. Regardless, he rushed out, using the debris as stepping stones. After escaping, he saw that the entire dormitory had been reduced to ruins. While he struggled to catch his breath, someone came and asked if it felt good to release all his power. The man praised his metal control and said survival after it meant he passed. Hearing this, Anton demanded to know who he was and what test he meant. He quickly replied the collar's absence should ease him and claimed he disabled it. Anton then pulled Metals close and demanded why it was removed if it meant dying. In response, the man asked if he truly wished to take his own life. Anton was then stunned when he asked if he felt different without the collar. When questioned about wanting to know, he released the hovering metal. The man quickly laughed, saying Anton was smart and he liked him. He also grabbed him away, saying he would fix the flaws in his power. But he caught him glancing back and asked if it was at someone he knew. He observed Anton's fast recovery and care for others, so he pushed him and urged him to step back. Following it, he bit his thumb. The bite was so intense that his thumb was torn off. After that, he spat it into his other hand and approached the crushed dormitory. Then he threw his thumb toward it. The severed thumb began to diffuse and shone brightly in the air. Following it, he pressed Anton to go, but he still reeled from his finger. So he replied it was nothing and he'd adjust. Yet he kept glancing behind. So he then saw the dormitory explode. At the same time, the man urged him to forget the past from now on. While he declared he's also a god of the new world, Anton anxiously called Wade's name. Afterwards, flames continued to engulf the entire ruins. Wade's cup noodles were also set on fire, but a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed it. Soon, rescue forces reached the site and discovered someone beneath. After pulling Wade out, they were shocked he was alive and had a familiar scar. But they chose to bring him back first, fearing his death would erase all clues. Later at the Superpower Bureau, the captain was notified the survivor was now conscious. She also added he was in the interrogation room and could now be questioned. The captain agreed upon hearing this, but said he would go after he finished reading. Seeing him read comics, she urged him to come, but he corrected her it was Manhwa. Meanwhile, inside the interrogation room, a woman observed Wade. She watched him eat and reminded him to slow down. However, he did not listen, so she warned him that he might choke. When he continued to ignore her, she simply kept observing. She studied him closely, thinking his scar was exactly like Nisha's, but his energy and thermal readings were normal, unlike Nisha's. Looking closer, she thought he seemed like an ordinary harmless boy, so she briefly considered dissecting him. However, her eyes widened as she realized he had not slowed down his eating at all, so she asked herself if instant noodles were really that good. As she said this, she did not notice someone appearing behind her. The captain noted they were delicious, which immediately frightened her. Still, he said slaves like Wade found it delicious, but she reminded him they all have powers. He then told her not to dwell on details and asked if Wade was the survivor. He looked at him intensely and confirmed that he was completely uninjured. He also noted Wade lacked ordinary ability since no normal stomach swells that much. He then inspected his data and asked Tara if the testing gear was reliable. She replied that she could not guarantee it either. They had tested it numerous times, but the results were always different. The captain was surprised that Wade's bone density reached 38 grams per square centimeter, since he recalled normal density is 1.2, and she agreed. Moving on, he asked Wade how much he knew about his origin, but Wade only looked at him blankly. Then he asked origin's meaning, which made him recall that laborers knew only hygiene. So he told them it meant childhood, but Wade only repeated it, puzzled. He then wondered if laborers were raised like livestock, but Tara said knowledge was dangerous. She also added city work is easy now, though she felt conflicted about it. Thus, he chose to go slow and read. Wade was registered 19 years ago. Tara immediately reacted upon hearing that it was 19 years ago. After all, that was around the time he took Nisha in. The captain then grabbed Wade, saying he knew what to do next. He pointed out he had to measure his ability. He also told Tara to come along, and she quickly followed. Later in the training room, he told her to cut systems even if higher-ups asked. Just then, the system prompted them to restore monitoring and control. But they ignored it, and he ordered Wade to stand on the machine. After Wade did so, he said he might have physical strengthening like the monsters outside. So higher-ups must not know, and he ordered her to give a full energy unit. She was startled by this, as giving full energy untested was dangerous, but he told her it was part of testing, and pointed out Wade handled 50 bowls earlier. She then proceeded to reach into her coat and took out a bar for Wade to eat. Wade quickly caught it and immediately put it into his mouth, so she was surprised to see that he was eating it with the packaging still on. Meanwhile, Wade commented that it tasted somewhat magical. Not long after, his face turned red and he yelled it was hot. His nose even released smoke from the heat, but he soon felt a surge of power filling his body. The captain simply snorted as he watched. Then he clicked the remote to test if he could endure what came next. At that moment, Wade stood on the machine. Suddenly, a massive pillar shot out from the wall toward him. The captain ordered him to use all his power to block it. However, he nervously asked how that was even possible. Unexpectedly, he shattered it with a single punch. As the impact echoed, the captain remarked it was stronger than expected. Wade, on the other hand, excitedly asked if this was what it felt like to be full. Looking at the wreckage, he cried he had endless power. And as the debris floated around, he was filled with amazement. But soon, his stomach shrank, and he collapsed to the ground. With his strength gone, he lost consciousness. The captain then called Tara, who assumed it's about repairs, but he said no. He then pointed around asking if a human could bear it, and she said no. So they looked at Wade, who now lay unconscious and thin. The captain noted Wade might match what they searched for, possibly the Bureau's Superman. Hearing this, she asked if they should report him to their superiors. However, he asked if she wished Wade to suffer as they had. He then joked about selling him to a researcher, and Tara kicked him for the ridiculous remark. As he said her skills improved, despite her doctor role, Wade's eyelids stirred. Though his sight dimmed, he heard them plan to keep him on the team. Afterwards, he suddenly woke up in fright. He saw the captain, who remarked that he was finally awake. Setting that aside, he welcomed him into the Defense Bureau. However, Wade looked at him in confusion, which made him visibly annoyed. Just then, Wade declared he was a cleaner collecting garbage on the main street, so he asked if his wage as cleaner could pay for repairs. Upon hearing this, Wade asked what payment meant. Tara then quietly explained that slaves like him knew nothing about money, so he proceeded to ask if he wished to probe the accident and take revenge. But he had no idea what revenge meant either, so Tara said he'd know only his job, which made him remark that administrators were overbearing. Still, she suggested they use something familiar to him, so after that she clapped her hands as a signal. Then she presented Wade with a table filled with cup noodles. Days later, he received a uniform and became part of Special Class 2. The captain said the clothes were temporary and loose, but he noticed he'd grown taller. Tara then said his metabolism spiked, and his body leaping years in growth. She explained it's due to his abilities and malnutrition, but he still needed observation. However, the captain's attention drifted elsewhere. As she explained she'd handle Wade's meals, she questioned his strange gaze. He gestured at her now smaller figure and said she had a gift for Wade. She quickly covered herself and snapped. Her abilities weren't to be discussed. Yet he casually replied that everyone in Branch 3 already knew, so she kicked him and declared it's all because of his big mouth. However, a sudden chill struck her foot, and he realized he'd forgotten to inform her. He warned her not to get close since his hormones are unstable again. He showed his hand and explained cold zones could appear anytime. Hearing this, she scolded him for ignoring regular checkups. Realizing she'd been too lenient, she ordered him to follow her for an examination, but he replied he needed Wade outside the city, so she firmly claimed her role as doctor. As he left muttering about the mission, she told Wade to seek Nisha or Luke outside, since he couldn't trust the captain, which made the captain ask why. Just as she was about to leave, she noticed the bag she'd nearly forgotten, so she opened it and said she had a gift for Wade. She gave him a stronger energy bar and warned not to eat it without her consent. He nodded in agreement upon hearing this. However, she sternly warned him never to ask about the item's origin. When she asked if he understood, he said yes, and for the first time he felt fear. Later in the standby room, Nisha was busy cooling herself down when Wade suddenly arrived, looking for her. He explained Tara had taken the captain, so another must lead him outside. After hearing this, the ice in her hand melted from irritation. Later, outside the vice captain's room, they saw a notice saying no one was inside. Wade concluded it was vacant, yet Nisha already pressed the button. After burning through the lock, she hastily opened the door, but they found only an empty room, and Wade confirmed his suspicion. Yet she pointed out that there was compressed gas inside the chair. Her eyes shimmered as she raised her finger and released her power. With this, she easily struck the chair with fire. When there was still no response, she confirmed that no one was present, so she ordered Wade to follow, as he now learned how to hide suspicion. But just under the desk, her target sweat nervously after barely escaping the fire. Later, outside, Nisha decided to accompany Wade. She asked why the captain wanted him out, and he answered it's for combat. However, she questioned if he had heard correctly. He confirmed it, and this made her say he'd likely regret it. Yet she decided it didn't matter as long as he lived. As they continued walking, Wade asked what combat meant. She replied that it was nothing and that he would understand soon enough. Later, at gate 102, they finally arrived. She told the guards Special Class 2 was leaving and ordered the gate opened. But the guards checked the records and said it was impossible with the white ape restless. He also noted a temporary ban on opening the outer gates, so she could only sighed and told them to bring out the dog hole. Hearing this, they realized it was Captain Dean who intended to go out. Later, as they left, a guard said the dog hole was unstable due to collar faults. He also added superhumans on both sides now are getting reckless, which confused Wade. So he explained people inside sought escape and outsiders sought entry. A stench then made him look at a door where too many had died. He also said rumors painted the outside as paradise, and he wished to let people see the truth. He approached the door and began forcing it open. As he struck it repeatedly, he said that if not for the collars suppressing emotions, they would have broken free, but soon exhaustion stopped him from opening it. He then asked Wade for help, and he quickly agreed, so he told him that he would count. But before he could start counting, Wade simply placed his hand on the door. With a push, it quickly came loose, so the guard fell to the ground, asking if that strength was his ability. Wade confirmed it, but Nisha ordered him to keep moving. As they left, she warned the guard not to pry, and he quickly agreed. However, as he waved them off, he secretly took out an item behind his back. Meanwhile, inside, Nisha tried to open the next door, but it would not budge, so Wade offered to help, and when he pushed it, the door opened effortlessly. But what appeared before him was a massive hand. It instantly grabbed him, and Nisha called out his name in panic, but the creature had already captured him. She then cursed as she realized it was the cancerous white ape. Moreover, it was fused with the body tissue of other ability users. Meanwhile, Wade began to mutter that the ape was too strong. Suddenly, he noticed its skin shifting toward him and wondered what it was. Nisha saw this and shouted for him not to move. She immediately unleashed her power and set the ape ablaze. Its body exploded and finally released him. He then asked in confusion what was going on, and she replied there was no time to explain. She quickly called the captain for aid, yet Tara replied he's resting and asked for severity. Just as Nisha replied that she was unsure, the ape behind her began to move again. She sensed it and turned around immediately, but the surrounding cancers suddenly fell silent. They looked closer and saw them all pinned down by iron rods. Not far away, two figures watched the scene unfold. Watching the cancers fall, the woman told the man he has no right to do that even as new saint. But she was hit by rods mid-speech, and Anton stood surprised to see Wade. Later, Wade found himself being struck from side to side. Though he was trapped between those fists, he still managed to shout that he was fine. Meanwhile, Nisha fought as she reported that someone had sealed the cancer. After killing the ape behind her, she warned the noise drew more white apes. She also reported her temperature was critical and unsustainable, so she urged Tara to find a solution. However, Tara replied Dean could not be awakened, and Luke was missing, but sending ordinary members would result in countless casualties. Hearing this, she decided to stop waiting and eliminate them herself. She began to levitate as her power spiraled out of control. As her eyes turned white, Tara warned her that she could not act recklessly with her current cooling system, but she clenched her teeth and said it was better than being torn apart. However, she warned that losing control meant the newcomer might not survive. At Wade's mention, Tara told her to have him eat the energy bar. While Nisha said it should have been sooner, she warned against more than a single bite, but the link cut off as Nisha's heat rose and left her at risk of dehydration. She then tossed it aside and decided not to dwell on Tara's instruction that she didn't hear. She called out to Wade, who immediately turned to her. She said she couldn't tell why he was chosen, but he might have a hidden ability. So as she grabbed her tie, she said Tara had allowed him to eat the energy bar. In addition, she declared that the real battle was about to begin. Wade smiled brightly upon hearing that he could eat it during a real fight, so he leapt forward, shouting that he loved real battles. Without hesitation, he took all of them and shoved them into his mouth. He did not even chew and simply swallowed them whole. Seeing his carefree attitude, she said it counted as a superpower, but she stressed he could not face the white apes alone and drew her item. She explained the Deus Ex Machina Luke gave her would be used sooner than planned. So, as she activated it, she hoped it would not fail her. However, she suddenly froze when she noticed something was wrong. The apes in front of her had all collapsed, and Wade stood among them. She called out to him, only to see him devouring the bodies. His hair had also grown longer, and when he turned to face her, his mouth was stained with blood. Moments later, his mouth stretched wide like that of a monster. Seeing this, she was taken aback and demanded to know what he was, but he only stared at her. Then he rushed forward with his mouth wide open. However, he slipped on the grass and fell face first onto the ground, yet he still managed to get back up quickly. Realizing he couldn't handle the power, she decided to subdue him first. She then prepared to use her tool. Wade, on the other hand, struggled to stand and tried to lunge at her again, but he slipped once more, so she could only watch him awkwardly. As she questioned the situation, a hoverpod appeared behind her. The person on it said this was normal and asked if Wade was the captain's recruit. She realized it was Luke and commented his initiative was uncommon, but he said Tara warned him lives were at stake, and he also noted her gear was unused, so he concluded that he had arrived too early. She set the item aside, and noting his arrival meant he had a solution. Then she looked at Wade and asked what he meant by calling it normal. Luke said Wade was like the ape, and instincts overtaking him under stress. He added her radiation marked her as prey, and Wade's power surged to reach her. But the loosened earth couldn't bear his strength, and it collapsed beneath him. He also noted he would soon strike, prompting her to ask why he kept talking. Just as he said, Wade managed to climb out of the pit and landed near Nisha. Seeing his stride, Luke questioned his ground control and his refusal to slow. Nevertheless, he was about to close in, so Nisha urged Luke to act since her ability was already at its limit. He then calmly raised his fingers and said no panic was needed. As Wade continued forward, several drones suddenly rushed in. It blocked his path and successfully forced him away from her. As Luke told her not to meddle, she commented he'd been busy with drones. He then jumped down from the hover pod and admitted that without his drones, his abilities were nothing special. With that, he directed them to surround Wade. At the same time, Wade frantically chased after them. Luke kept him occupied and asked Nisha to be honest with him. He noted the energy bar was likely the cause, and Wade only had to exhaust it. Still, he sighed, knowing his new drones would demand great expense to restore. Just then, the captain came reminding them he had ordered them to wait, since he disliked being woken abruptly because he rarely got to rest. After saying this, he ordered Luke to restrain Wade. Then he added that Wade could handle it with Tara's bar and 3 tubes. However, he decided to use 2 and opened his arms. As he loaded the bar, he said Wade wouldn't die from a little extra energy. On the other side, Wade continued fighting against the swarm of drones. With a sudden burst of strength, he managed to drive some of them away. One drone was then frozen. As Dean noted, Wade couldn't hear, yet he'd explain. The drone fell while he explained cold was just one of his powers, and his energy was able to destroy matter itself. Luke heard this and commented he was rambling again. They then watched as he declared he could also absorb kinetic energy and radiation. So he raised his arm, asking Wade to let him help and make him calm down. A gust of force was drawn from Wade as the energy was absorbed, and his body began to freeze. The captain quickly pulled his arm back after it, but he was alerted that his energy capacity overflowed, and he had to stop. He was then shocked to see they'd both reached their limits. As he questioned where Wade's abilities came from, Wade began to thaw. Not long after, an even greater surge of power erupted from him. Seeing that he was preparing to charge again, he called out to Luke and Nisha for assistance. As Wade rushed forward, Nisha immediately ordered Luke to use dry powder. The hover pod moved beside him and released the powder onto him. Nisha took advantage of this and ignited him with her power. Then she proceeded to take out her device to activate it. As she did, her clothes began to vanish. She then looked at herself in surprise as she realized her energy was still intact. Moments later, her body emitted a brilliant light. Her appearance also transformed, and she declared she had formed into an armor. The captain was momentarily stunned seeing this, but he immediately shouted that he wanted one too. With this thought, he hurried over to Luke. He began asking if it was some kind of new equipment he had developed. He asked Luke for one, but Luke said it was only a test item. He even offered his body, but Luke said replication was impossible. As the battle continued behind, he dropped to his knees to beg, yet Luke refused again. Just then, the fight reached them and Nisha ordered them to assist. She also revealed Luke's device changed her unstable energy into armor. It enabled her to wield 3,000-degree fire, though not for long. Luke explained it was just a prototype able to block heat, yet unsafe without more energy. Nisha then faced Wade, claiming Tara could repair her arm if she sacrificed it for energy. However, as she struck him again, she realized something was wrong, since even with a direct hit, it did not harm him at all. So she immediately asked Dean what they should do, as Wade continued transforming into a monster. Dean told her to stay calm and use the armor to ignite him from within, yet she hesitated, asking if he meant to burn him. But before she could do so, Luke told them to stop moving. He summoned his drones and said that he had misjudged the situation. The drones hovered before Wade's eyes, as he said he first thought it was only thermal vision. However, it now appeared that his optic nerves had been strengthened to varying degrees, so he realized his brain had changed, causing neural instability. He also said that memories stayed but perception changed. So a normal mind, paired with superhuman senses, would distort reality itself. Thus, it turns the world into something unfamiliar to him. He emphasized that under such conditions, even a sane person could lose their mind, so he believes sensory loss caused madness in Wade and the ape. While he explained they saw hormones as a catalyst, Dean cut in asking for a solution, so he called his drones back and said that he did. He sent them swarming toward Wade, but he followed them like butterflies, so Dean asked if that was all. He then replied that it was not and took out another device. He explained it was a correction mask for the ape, yet failed from its mental ruin. After making adjustments, he had planned to test it on new recruits instead. However, Dean told him to stop. He demanded if the ape's hidden casualties were from his experiments. Luke ignored him and ordered silence, but Dean shouted he was punished for that. However, he stopped when he noticed Wade looming behind him. As Wade lunged forward with a punch, he quickly reloaded his arm and blocked the attack. Sensing the atom within his fist, he drained it. Then he unleashed his full power in a counterattack. Wade then let out a scream as his arm froze and shattered from the impact. However, Wade's shattered arm began to regenerate, so they urgently shouted for Luke to hurry, as his recovery was happening too fast. Luke immediately moved and ordered Nisha to hold him in place. In response, she warned that he had better fix it quickly because she was running out of energy. She then released continuous bursts of heat to restrain Wade. Luke took this opportunity to rush forward with his device, and he successfully attached the mask. The moment it was secured, Wade regained his senses. He looked around in confusion, questioning what he had just done. As he saw his monstrous reflection, he wondered why he had such strange memories, and asked himself if all of it had truly been him. Suddenly, he noticed his regenerating arm. Seeing flashes of himself attacking Dean, he realized it could not be a mistake. He stared at his hand, recalling everything, as the image of his shattered arm resurfaced in his mind. But now he saw it mend itself, and finally accepted it was him. His body returned to normal, and he collapsed, wondering if he was a monster. As that thought lingered, countless faces appeared before him. They became blurry and twisting into a swirling haze. Within it, he saw a figure falling, and when he looked closer, the familiar body turned toward him with a monstrous face. The sight jolted him awake in terror. Back at the dorm on day 5 of the ape's appearance, Wade lay silent on his bed. Dean saw him wake and realized nightmares plagued him since returning, so he urged him to walk and relax, since his powers would steady with a calm mind. Still, he didn't expect Wade to be depressed, so Luke explains, suppression destabilizes moods. He also remarked that despite everything, it's a miracle Wade's sanity was intact. Hearing this, Dean asked how they could grasp the ape and told him to guess. After thinking for a moment, Dean turned to call Wade. He intended to take him, yet saw he was gone. Later, at the residence for dismissed ability users, Wade walked aimlessly. He caught someone pleading to work with wind ability, but the supervisor rejected it. The supervisor walked off, cursing his luck as slaves tried to block him. Wade then watched the old man follow him. He heard the old man plead to work and be fed, though his wind only shifted scraps. He tried to explain that he was just hungry and still willing to work, but he eventually collapsed, muttering that he was starving. So Wade could only lower his head as he moved forward. Not long after he arrived at Shang City, where civilians gathered and shopped, people noticed him and showed disgust, even though he was defense staff. His gaze turned grim as he heard them accuse their kind of ruining the city. Due to this, he began to wonder how he failed to realize it before. He looked around at others like him, then noticed a slave child on the ground. He watched as the child was scolded for grabbing food from the ground, so he clenched his fist after seeing those with powers suffer most. Meanwhile, the child went on eating what had been stepped on. The man noticed this, and he kicked him for doing so in secret. Wade witnessed this, and his eyes widened with anger. In his eyes, the man kept stomping on the child while onlookers smiled, so he stepped forward, and the man looked up at him in confusion. Without hesitation, he grabbed him, and the man demanded what he was doing. But he gripped harder and he vowed to destroy him for daring to touch a noble. He also refused to let go, so the man shouted he was under attack. Just as he called for someone to execute him, his body was crushed. Wade laughed at the sight, and his power spiraled out of control. In that instant, he annihilated everyone around him. His face twisted into something monstrous, and the child before him trembled in fear. As he approached, the child called him a monster. Those words shattered everything, and he saw a spider lily blooming. He woke up with a start, and found himself lying on the bed once more. He sat up in confusion, but he spotted Dean and began asking what had happened. Dean said he fainted mid-city in uniform and asked if he grasped how terrible that looked. He then glanced at himself and asked if he had hurt anyone. However, Dean asked if he had hit his head instead. He gestured at the boy who returned him and told him to give thanks. He explained the boy could expand silicon to move objects and planned to recruit him. So while he urged the boy to eat slowly, he vowed to aid more children in need. Then he told Wade to rest 2 more days, since he's unsure if recruiting him in was right. After that, he led the child out to complete the registration. Left by himself, Wade felt calm, believing it was only a dream, but Luke suddenly appeared and told him to come along. Later outside, he clung to Luke's hoverpod, asking if they should inform superiors. Luke replied they were sneaking out, so no permission was needed. So he asked instead where they were headed, but he said it would make sense on arrival. While crossing the abandoned place, Luke told him he had a question. He asked if he knew superpowers, and he said Dean called them matter to energy change. But Luke replied it was only a shallow take since powers were unnatural. After landing, he said evolution is slow, but powers let people create anything. In simple terms, humanity was becoming more like gods. He then entered the building saying Wade likely did not know what a god was. So he shared, ancient people saw lightning as divine, and later worshipped it as a god, which means it's meaning something extraordinary that demanded reverence. He then gestured for him to follow inside as he turned on the light. As the room lit up, he stated he would explain all in detail. Wade stared at the pods. As Luke said, it was ironic for a superhuman to clean 20 streets. He listened as Luke said a worker in the past would be seen as a hero. He also added that leader reads old books only for comfort. As Wade touched a pod, Luke recalled first meeting Dean and was thrilled by his new power. Yet, in the end, he became only a laborer and felt bitter. After hearing this, Wade asked if he and the white ape were just objects. Luke answered, without pause, that they were. He emphasized that every superhuman was all the same. He said nature works by chance, mutations, and survival of the adaptable, but he noted humans overturned evolution because cooperation let all survive. Over time, selfish power ruined nature, and superpowers drove humanity off course. While he said this, a glowing eye appeared near the ventilation shaft. A small figure suddenly leapt toward Wade and startled him. But Luke reassured him it was harmless and was only clingy. As the creature nuzzled against him, Wade asked what it was. Luke explained it was a cat, a species wiped out by radiation after the catastrophe. Wade understood this and asked about its origin. Luke replied that he had cloned it, which only deepened his confusion. He then clarified that he had used cells from the white ape. Upon hearing this, Wade was stunned that such a creature could come from it. Luke then noted superhumans may hold godlike power, but the ape embodied the form. It's able to shift into any form, but it would still collapse without knowledge to guide it. However, he looked at Wade and told him that he was different. Yet Wade wondered if he was truly different, since in sanitation he never had to think. But now, strange thoughts filled his mind and blurred what was real. That morning, the captain said he fainted, though his memory showed the opposite. He had turned into the white ape and killed countless people. He had even seen things he had never encountered before, so he was now afraid of his own power and wanted it removed. But Luke immediately grabbed him for talking nonsense. He slammed him down, saying they would not remove it but make it flourish. He also explained superhumans survived only because of inhibitors in their collars, and added collars used human genes and required upkeep, which Wade finally grasped. He also revealed humans had lost survival, and the city existed just to create utopias. But he remarked, nature was striking, with human genes flawed but complete. Wade then heard him call superhumans incomplete evolution, and their system full of gaps. He also added that after failures, the administration grew protective of humans. So if this continued, superhumans might become mere tools to sustain humans. Because of this, he had been conducting experiments in secret for years. He revealed that even the armor Nisha had used was one of his creation. He explained the white ape proved humans could reach a perfect body after years of study. Its body was the sole method, which is a principle binding him and those outsiders. But now he said he had found a better option and pointed at Wade. He snapped his fingers and asked him to lend him a hand. But he was confused by this and asked what he meant. Suddenly, a containment capsule formed around him. It trapped him inside, and his arms were severed at the same time. So he began calling Luke and asking about his hands. Luke replied he struck before his ability reacted, and now it's time to start their work. He quickly activated his machines, knowing he had to finish before Wade lost control. At that moment, the casket began to shake violently. Luke moved with urgency because there was much to be done, but he also hoped Wade would see it was for him and all superhumans ahead. As the machinery neared the casket, he told him to endure the pain. The device pierced through the enclosure, and Wade cried out in pain. Meanwhile, Luke observed even his severed limbs still moved. He also noted that the fresh regenerative cells were ideal raw material. He then confirmed Wade's duplication steady at 98% with no decay. And compared to the other apes he had studied, this was the only clear difference. But he noticed the unfamiliar chromosome and recalled Wade's scar with Nisha. He remembered her genetic data had once resisted standard analysis too, so he used the same adjusted method, and he finally succeeded. The system soon began recompiling the data. However, his expression was filled with confusion. The sheer volume stretched the display past its limits. He stared in astonishment, and also realized that all Wade's secrets were within. As he considered Nisha's anomalous genes as the key, Wade broke free. He quickly rushed in, but Luke saw the risk worthwhile, and activated his neural upgrade. While his machine's limbs turned white, he explained his brain could only make a minute current, but it was enough to interface with surrounding systems. By linking to every powered object, they became extensions of his mind. So in this state he could calculate Wade's movements. He also added that he could also interfere with the outer layer of his ability. As Wade's monstrous form cracked, Luke finally spoke to him directly. His amplified being told him this was not mind reading, and speech was still required. He told him not to fear his ability because it was only self-protection. He added that once he embraced his gift, he'd rediscover the long-forgotten wonder. So he urged him to calm down and regain control of his body. Then he told him to meet him again in the real world. He slowly faded as he said it's a world entirely new, and a place where only humans existed. Back in reality, Luke was questioned for hiding forever and surprised at joining the Bureau. He then replied, they knew his long life, and he only wanted to interact with others. Knowing he's a monster not easily killed, they decided to kill him before taking him back. Luke heard this and answered that his colleague loathed the word monster. So he called Wade and urged him to gather strength and swing his arm. An armored hand then emerged from the darkness. As Wade struck forward, he asked if that was what he meant. As soon as he acted, the bald men felt the air was gone. Meanwhile, Wade felt amazed by this feeling. So he asked Luke what he had done to his body. Since the sensation was incredible, he felt excited and shouted that he wanted more. Luke then replied he'd only made small tweaks to his body. Hearing this, he asked if that meant he was a successful experiment. Suddenly, the bald men recovered and marveled at what monster he was. Wade heard this and immediately told them not to call him that. As soon as he spoke, his right arm shifted and released a weapon. Luke observed the suit worked well and was fully thought-controlled. However, Wade complained that his arm felt too excited. After being struck by the limb, Luke noted the suit worked, but he needed control. Meanwhile, the intruders were pushed back and baffled by Wade's strength. But the masked man forbade the word monster and said number 11 sought Wade's power, so he chose to capture him since it would bring them closer to divination. Luke heard they kept making up terms and asked if they could manage them both. The man replied that they were not foolish enough to come unprepared. Hearing this, Luke showed a hint of surprise. But before he could react further, the ground suddenly enveloped him. He recognized it was Mulrit and muttered that it had been a long time, but Wade called out to him in concern. So he reassured him it was only an old acquaintance causing trouble. He also told him to trust his instincts, since his actions outpaced thought. Moreover, the two enemies weren't a real threat and could serve as practice, and if anything went wrong, he could call him for help. Wade was then confused after he left. Still, he managed to raise his arm and acted on instinct. A sharp noise erupted, stopping the two men and leaving them in pain. He then stared at himself in awe, even though not grasping what he'd done. With growing confidence, he asked them what their abilities were. One of them threatened to make him regret asking, but the other stopped him. He explained they'd serve as stepping stones based on some books, and the other agreed. But he said, since it was Wade's first time, they might win before he developed. The other man heard this and smiled wickedly. But the masked man hesitated, since heroes often made a first transformation unstoppable. Deciding not to risk it, they summoned help and struck the ground. Then he told Mulrit beneath they needed to retreat and leave the matter to the Saints' people. Not long after the ground rose in front of Wade. This time, he saw the effect lasted longer. The mud parted and a figure slowly emerged. A woman with horns then stood before him. With a new foe before him, he assured himself she's not a threat, just like Luke said. The woman heard this and let out a soft laugh. Then she asked him if Luke had really described her that way. She also identified him as the white ape and was amazed to find such a prize chasing Luke. But Wade said he feared nothing because Luke said she can't hurt him. Just then, he noticed a black liquid slowly dripping down his suit. She licked it and explained that this sticky substance was her ability. As it spread, he said it felt warm and not unpleasant, but soon he realized it was too much, and his breathing grew hard. She then stepped closer and said it was asphalt oil. She touched him while asking if he knew superhuman could be boundless, just like her who once was nothing but oil seeping underground. But under the saint's teaching, she learned her power and reshaped oil at will, where she turned them into obedient creations that followed her command. The oil rained down while she thanked the disaster and made their meeting exciting. While she drew out an item, she added her oil was not only adhesive and toxic. So she ignited her lighter and talked about the most thrilling aspect of oil. She brought the flame closer to him and set the substance ablaze. In an instant, Wade's body was engulfed in fire. She watched the flames spread and declared that the party had begun. She danced in delight around the flames, while Wade struggled to move his arm. But as the structure collapsed in the heat, a figure emerged from the flames. Wade opened his mouth wide and inhaled the flame before him. Realizing it, he wondered if he had swallowed the flames. But the woman grew more excited to see that he's an unbreakable toy, so she poured out more oil, and yelling it only fueled her desire to make him oil. He then quickly raised his arm to block her attacks, yet a strange sensation rose in him, and he felt like vomiting. His jaw stretched open, and a beam of fire burst from his mouth. The woman reacted immediately and tried to dodge, but she also could not hide her surprise at the overwhelming force. Meanwhile, Wade was stunned. The fire had come from his mouth. Panic then struck as he realized it was his body, and not the mask. He hurriedly called out to Luke, saying something felt wrong. Luke heard his cry, and reminded him the experiment was his body and not the battle suit. After hearing this, he finally steadied himself. After he reminded him there was no need to shout, he informed him that he's busy now. The woman before him suddenly called him unnatural, so he said she was too. Then he looked at her and called her Malrit. In response, she called him Lord of Necromancy, and said all was due to his old experiments. She also mentioned his name Luke, and said he justified the child's name. She then discusses how his body was altered, but regeneration broke his mind. Yet he replied that, at the time, he had neither body nor awareness, so it was fine. She quickly remarked he still belittled life, yet part of her was starting to understand. Luke, however, replied that her current self still could not understand him. He then told her to state her purpose, but reminded her he would not return. In response, she revealed that the temple's plan had encountered a flaw. He was surprised by this, and said that all had been fine when he left. He added she proved the experiment worked, unless she alone survived. She replied that she was, but at the same time she was not. As part of her fated, she said the others had merged with her into the river. Their surroundings then shifted as she showed they had become like in hell. Hearing this, Luke admitted that the result had gone far beyond his expectations. He then watched the surroundings as matter fragments broke in the current. Suddenly, she appeared behind, mentioning his plan to reduce organs to cells. Thus, damage from power would not cause organ death. Luke then watched her altered body as she said cells ensured perfection, but the key was gone, so he asked what she meant. In response, she said that it was identities. She added that 20 years ago at the temple after he left, subjects lost their minds. At the same time, their cells grew unstable, and cohesion was lost. Only she lived due to her fungal-based powers, and her DNA blended inside the lab. She awoke to find she had become the yellow river below the temple known as Malrit. After hearing this, he asked if those cells carried abilities, and if she could access them. She then accused him of coldness, but he replied he abandoned sympathy. He also told her to do the same, since her life would be long if nothing failed. Finally, she told him the missing subjects, and the saint's plan would doom superhumans. She added that others had begun turning to easier solutions. She also said Mushroom found a way to break collars and drew followers. Hearing this, Luke knew the collar disaster was that person's doing. Suddenly, she brought up Wade and asked if he could become their antidote. Luke then drew an item, saying Wade wasn't ready, and he knew what mattered, so he could only give Wade's cell sample that he had already modified. She accepted it, and asked if he would not return since the temple needed his calmness. Yet he said madness was needed, and he left the temple to keep power balanced. After all, status and origin meant nothing to him, since he had only one goal. That goal was to ultimately replace humans with mutants. Suddenly, the ceiling quaked, and he knew the fight above had not ended. So he warned unchecked chaos would end badly, and urged her to withdraw her men. Yet she sat down and said she wanted to talk more with him. She also added that the two above would not cause any serious trouble. However, he shook his finger and said that was not certain. He explained that her subordinate might not be a problem, but Wade was different. Hearing this, she reminded him her people ranked among the temple's higher saints. Just as he was about to respond, the ceiling behind him shattered. He then turned around and saw the oil woman. He saw Wade as well and immediately asked why he looked like that, but he gave no answer and launched another attack. The woman gritted her teeth, asking what he was as his shifts never ended. Before she could finish, Wade unleashed a barrage of fire. Luke then turned to Malrit and pointed out exactly what he had meant. She understood at once and decided to pull her back. Moments earlier on the upper floor, the woman had realized that Wade could spit fire, but she declared herself a high temple disciple, and her oil is effective against heated foes. However, he was busy wondering why he couldn't release flame, and this angered her. She continued to guess he might resist fire, but warned her power was more than oil, so she stressed it, let her shape matter as she wished. An oil-born skeleton then surged forward to attack him. He tried to block its jaws with his bare hands. Though it managed to swallow him, he tore through its skull and forced his way out. After landing on the ground, he shouted that it was not impressive at all, but she attacked again and called him naive. She even urged him to experience the full extent of his own power, but she noticed the oil around him writhed, and she was confused. Wade then slipped free, using a tail that had suddenly formed behind him. But the sight left him just as confused. He began shouting loudly, which startled her enough to also make her scream. Not long after, the two of them went silent. He then proceeded to look at her, and said it was now his turn. He charged forward with his tail, and she raised a barrier to block it. However, the impact shattered her defense, and cracked the ground beneath them. The crash made the ceiling fall beneath, and this marked the moment Luke witnessed. At the same time, Luke noticed the tail, and was visibly surprised. He called out to Wade and told him to stop. Wade, who was about to defeat the woman, quickly paused in confusion. Seeing Mulred approaching, the woman tried to explain, but she said they can now leave. Yet before they could go, Luke called out again. He called her with nickname Mimi and left temple matters to her, while also asking if she would chase him. Hearing that name, she froze and began to blush. But her subordinate asked why he called her that, so she told her to just return. She came to Luke, noting the name was long unused, and she was surprised he remembered. Luke replied he had forgotten many things but never her name. Hearing this, she could not help but be love-struck. Without another word, she moved back toward the river. Then she told him they would meet again if fate allowed, and finally disappeared. Wade watched this and was left staring blankly at Luke. Luke then turned to him and said all he saw must stay secret. As they left, he warned he would not help if he spoke, so Wade asked about his look instead. He then told him he would explain after they returned, since he wanted Dean to be jealous. Back at the bureau, Dean's eyes widened the moment he saw Wade. He asked why a newcomer already had armor, and Luke said there was more ahead. So he told Wade he would teach him how to reverse the transformation. Hearing this, Dean practically bent over in envy. Wade, on the other hand, focused as Luke said he would help through his method. He instructed him to reach for the devices on his waist. Thus, he did as told and asked if it was correct. Luke confirmed and told him to press firmly. He followed the instructions, and though it hurt, his suit began to dissolve. Luke explained the agents would return his form, and side effects lessen over time. He also said his form lasted 5 minutes, and longer use made returning hard. Dean heard this and said a hero limited by transformation time felt like pure fantasy. So he loudly complained and demanded a set for himself. Luke ignored him and instead told the others to turn around. He even urged Nisha since she understood why. She quickly turned away, and Tara followed even she's confused. A moment later, Nisha glanced back, and Tara immediately turned red. While Nisha busily looked downward, Tara called out Wade's name in irritation. She sternly ordered him to put his clothes back on. The next day outside the building, Dean called out to Wade. He somberly told him to never forget what he had learned today. In response, Wade saluted and shouted that he would not. He even reached for his suit to demonstrate it. But Dean said a true hero transforms only when needed, though envy would actually kill him. Setting that aside, he offered his treasured books. He urged him to learn new moves and not fail. In response, he shouted that he understood, but their attention shifted to a voice demanding Dean, which he quickly recognized. A woman then came rushing toward him upon seeing him. As a result, he ended up pinned against the wall by her feet. Yet she only said they can talk later, and she turned to Wade instead. She introduced herself as Carly, Dean's best friend and leader of Class 5. After that, Dean told Wade he had forgotten something. Wade was confused by this and asked what it was. Later, a doctor scanned him and said he didn't look like a white ape, but they were interrupted by a man urging them to get to work. District 2 Chief Zach then told them they did not interfere in special units. But Wade's case drew the top leader's eyes, so he called them and he let Ritter speak. Ritter quickly introduced himself as a researcher at the science branch. He explained he was assigned to observe Wade and begin Phase 3 of adaptation. Hearing Phase 3, the bald man asked if he still wanted more monsters like them, but the man beside him said he hoped later stages would erase mundanes. The bald man exploded and insisted people like him must not wield powers. The fight quickly erupted, as the other man insisted mundanes should have vanished. Zack saw this and ordered them to take it easy, but his eyes dimmed when he saw that they were not stopping. So he finally clenched his fist, and metal suddenly appeared beneath them. The two were immediately restrained by it. Ritter saw this and began asking Zack if it was titanium alloy. He confirmed it, and added that the building used that element to manage them. Setting that aside, he ended the meeting and apologized. Dean quickly suggested leaving, but Carly asked for a drink, so he urged her to head back. Yet just as she called him heartless, they froze at a beeping sound. They then immediately looked at their collars and found that they had been switched off. Aside from them, everyone in the building had collars beeping red. As soon as it stopped working, their abilities began to spiral out of control. Some had their heads erupt in flames, while others began dissolving the nearby furniture. The bald man and the other man also started suffering from their own abilities. At that moment, Nisha was already erupting uncontrollably. Seeing the collars fail, Luke wondered if Mushroom was behind it, but he set that aside and urged Nisha to put on another collar. Upon receiving it, her body gradually calmed down. He then took the chance to hand another one to Tara. Tara reached for it amid the surrounding explosions. Just as her body was about to erupt, she managed to put it on in time. Smoke enveloped her body and restored it to normal. However, she was shocked to find she now had the same battle suit as Wade. She asked if Luke built them for everyone and told him to hand them out. But he said they relied on Wade's cells and data, so only their class had them. He also said they need to meet the dean and chief for countermeasures. Just as he wished the city wasn't fully hit, the chief spoke through the speaker. He ordered all surviving defenders to gather at the playground. Hearing this, Luke could not help but wonder if the Holy Temple had really gone this far. Meanwhile, in the director's office, the chief's words echoed as several lay weak on the floor. Zack then asked the other two if they could still hold on. The bald man said he barely survived, while the others said they can bear it as leaders. He added that in times like this, he envied the special class leaders. While Carly said there was nothing to envy, Dean told Zack the rescue was his to handle. He explained it's tied to past collar failures, and asked to let their team find the culprit. Zack understood and asked Lockett and Genta to help settle the station first. Zack turned to the window, saying they have long feared this day would come. The window shattered as he said collars, suppress powers, and ambition. He also insisted human nobility was false, and the collarless are the greatest enemy. As he finished speaking, the wall before him shattered. Then he declared that it was time to put the 3rd Division to the test. At that moment, the other superhumans were waiting outside, but Lockett suddenly said there's other threats beyond collarless mutants. He declared Genta the greatest threat for always speaking of killing ordinary people, but Zack did not respond and simply asked Genta to hand over the list. In response, Genta said it had already been sent to his phone. Lockett heard this and was left confused about the list. Meanwhile, Zack saw their hatred exceeded his guess and won't let them go, so he continued scanning names tied to exterminating humans. At that moment, the defenders grew uneasy because they thought the collars were safe, but they still tended to one another, where some grieve and hunt for spare collars. Suddenly, one asked to neutralize his powers with the others, but Zack's alloy metal appeared behind them. They were immediately restrained along with the others. Soon more of them were being captured. The others witnessed this and quickly recognized it as the chief's ability. At that moment, Zack exerted his full strength to display his power. Lockett saw this and began asking what he was doing, but Genta ordered him not to interfere because he was busy. Lockett became furious and demanded what list made the director turn on comrades. Genta replied that it was exactly as he had said, a list of people like him. He added the chief foresaw this day and had him pose as radical leader to gather intel. On learning he had faked it, he asked his true feelings and accused him of hypocrisy. Genta grew angry and asked if he's already done talking. He asked him as well if he thinks he's better than him. Lockett sweated as Genta spoke of years of hardship while he did nothing. He added that he also tried to report him to the chief, but he will let him off for now. Suddenly, Zack told them he might need a little bit more time, so they are free to continue talking. Lockett sweated heavily after seeing Genta's true fury, yet he still tried to ask him that he didn't have to yell. Soon, a scream from the window caught Wade's attention. Dean saw him stop and quickly ordered him to keep moving, but he replied that a bald man was falling, so Dean said it wasn't his business, and they had to find Luke for a plan. He also noted how they were in chaos without yet knowing who caused it. Wade then attempted to name the culprit based on Luke's account, but he heard Luke's voice telling him not to speak, as he would explain it himself. Dean noticed him hesitating and asked what Luke had said. However, their attention shifted, as Luke said he had a theory on the culprit. Suddenly, Ritter walked up to him, mentioning his reputation in the science department, yet he replied that it was just a bit of research. Setting that aside, he began explaining his emergency line response, but Dean cut him off. He angrily pointed at the 2 girls beside him, who were now wearing brand new suits. Luke explained he readied collars using Wade's cells for such a day, but Dean interrupted him to say what he wanted. He then furiously demanded to know where his was. Later, as their group passed through the sanitation area, Wade remarked that something felt off. Ritter heard this and asked what was wrong. He replied the trash truck lot shouldn't be this quiet at this hour. Ritter agreed workers wouldn't all strike, so clearly something was wrong. However, Dean noticed Ritter stopped and urged him to keep moving for safety. Just then, someone appeared after recognizing Wade. He began asking where he had been and what he was wearing, but Wade's gaze fell on Zane's neck, and he saw that his collar had also shut down. He quickly then replied that the collars had failed. He also revealed the others turned red and they exploded. While Ritter confirmed it wasn't only at the office, Wade asked if others survived. Zane replied, some survived and some not, while he wept uncontrollably. Ritter noted emotions caused it, and added emotional restoration was part of his study. So he claimed active emotions were deadlier than uncontrolled powers. Wade then asked Zane where the others were, since there's no body around. Zane replied that Anton was alive and had returned. He revealed Anton came with masked strangers, who took the survivors and bodies, so he hid. Upon hearing Anton's name, Wade was utterly shocked. Suddenly, Luke came up and asked Zane about the strangers in odd outfits. He then pointed at Tara and asked if they looked similar to her suit. Zane confirmed they wore suits like hers, then asked if they were from DSD. Tears of relief then came as he trusted the DSD had taken them. However, he's still confused by the tears streaming down his face. Meanwhile, Dean questioned Luke, who replied by asking if he recalled the sacred temple. Dean said he'd heard of them in the slums, and asked if the attacks were linked. Luke said yes, and he suspected Zane, so Dean asked if the temple was recruiting members. However, Wade insisted Anton would never join evil, so he stepped forward vowing to rescue his friends. Dean tried to stop him, but failed, so he could only decide to have the rescue be handled by others. He then reminded Wade he lacked their location, yet he claimed he could track by scent. Dean finally decided to discipline him more, and asked Ritter not to rate him badly, but Ritter said he'd never give someone with such senses a bad review. He added Wade's defiance wasn't weakness, and Dean concurred. He also remarked Wade's lowest point birthed real friendship and compassion, so he believed he'd use power for good, and hoped mutants would too before removing collars. Meanwhile, Wade fell from the sky, and finally landed on the ground, but he noticed someone standing before him. The man then said the defenders weren't so inept, since he reached him. Wade recognized him as from the temple, and asked if he took Anton. Hearing he knew Anton, the man asked if he was the ape who took human form. He then invited him to join them, since his friend Anton was already one of them. But Wade called it nonsense, and cried Anton would never join. He also firmly said that he would not either. But the man cut him off, saying that was exactly what he wanted to hear. He then stabbed himself, saying temple leaders valued Wade but he didn't care. He began tearing out his guts, and declared he must share his pain. His guts then spilled as he said he wanted Wade to suffer until his last breath. The thought even delighted him, and his eyes lifted with excitement. However, he was confused to see Wade gone. In an instant, Wade kicked him for talking too much. He also said Luke told him to get rough with anyone talking nonsense, but he stopped when the man's guts tightened around his neck. He was lifted and swung into the air. The man kept going, and said this was his signature technique. He pulled Wade through the air, saying he did not care about his white ape form. Nor did he care if the higher ranks admired him, so he spun him violently. Then he slammed him into the ground. As Wade crashed through a tree, he shouted that enduring pain makes one stronger. So he hurled him through trees, saying he had only been lucky so far. He also kept dragging him while declaring he was no model for mutants, and before Wade could use his ability, he vowed to tear him apart. So he launched him back into the sky, and smashed him down again. After doing this, he cursed that Wade is not the chosen one who can change the world. He then pushed his guts back in after his easy win. He even noted the new sacred body system was convenient, as it could heal his wounds almost instantly. He then recalled Mulrit saying the suits came from a new mutant that was mopped up. As the words of the new mutant lingered in his mind, he thought of Wade and turned back. He saw him asking if pain gave strength, and that he understood that suffering. He even managed to smile as he said he was no stranger to it. With that, he told him to watch as he transformed. After executing his pose, he pushed the device at his waist. Then he began to transform, and his suit quickly enveloped him. At the same time, the man tore open his stomach and pulled out stone-laden guts. He lunged with his guts chainsaw and said he would not wait. As he attacked, he shouted that halting transformation was simple. Wade's limbs were quickly severed since he couldn't harden mid-transformation. The man dragged him and said he would bring him in pieces for reward. However, Wade suddenly appeared before him, saying he had bad news. As he declared that his transformation was complete, his mouth armor snapped shut. His severed arms also moved, which made him like Luke's modification. When he called for his hands to return, they leapt into the air. As they flew back, he commented on how the man could control his guts. He grabbed him, saying it was disgusting, and no wonder he sided with villains. He even tightened his grip and said Dean told them how to use their powers. So once his arms merged and successfully reattached, he seized him, saying powers must be used against villains like him. So he hurled him far away, but when he looked at his hands, he found they had reattached the wrong way. Just then, his hand shifted, and his armor adjusted around it. He was quickly surprised as it corrected itself and admired Luke's work. He also felt his body different this time, and wondered if he could keep altering it. But the man's hand suddenly appeared, and asked if he had called his ability disgusting. He crawled upward, saying he knew that, but he never had a choice. He said DSD agents lived normally with powers in the city unlike him. His guts then poured on as he said they were marked as mutants with faulty abilities. He stressed he'd been abandoned as a baby and left in the wild to die. Though he once dreamed of being a mutant worker, it was still impossible. So now he wants Wade to understand his position. He began summoning ulcers from his stomach and carbonizing them. Due to this, he created what he called intestine diamond dust. However, someone stopped him and said that he was going to die. The person explained his system was numbed, but it would recover at the temple. After saying this, he greeted Wade, and Wade quickly recognized he was Anton. Anton reminded the man that emotions were useless in the temple's cause, yet he said they were equal in rank, and ordered him to let go, so he agreed, but told him to free himself. He then turned back to Wade, and directly asked him to join the sacred temple. He even stressed he should already know the reality of serving DSD, but he refused to listen and only asked if he had become evil. Anton admitted it, yet he said it was worth exposing DSD. With that, he asked him if he had heard of the ancient world. Wade quickly asked if it was the world described in comic. However, Anton was taken aback by this. Though unsure what he meant, he chose to continue. Wade then heard him reveal humans once had divine wisdom but frail bodies. Ancient archives showed the rich thrived, while the weak suffered and greed rose. They had wealth, tradition, and even freedom, which is all shaped by an imbalance born of spirit between the body. After explaining this, he asked if Wade understood, but he only stared at him in confusion. So he confessed he didn't grasp it either, since workers were forbidden from learning. As he spoke, he covered the man in iron, and the man asked what he was doing. He quickly tightened the restraint, and said Mulrit was sick so he would handle his return. But the man refused to believe and demanded release. He ignored it and hurriedly lifted his body. Then he sent him flying away to cast him aside. After it, he asked Mulrit to send them to Church 17 to show Wade the truth. Then he told Wade he knew her, and Wade replied she was the fungal woman who liked Luke. Anton became confused, but he was asked about his remark that she was unwell. While the ground closed and he said she was never unwell, Wade reverted at his limit. Meanwhile, outside, a drone managed to capture the scene. Beneath the camera feed were Luke's eyes, watching closely. But after he shared Wade was gone, Dean asked if the temple held equal knowledge. He replied that he could not say much, but it was true. Dean's face darkened as he said he respects his secret, but Wade was different. He argued the temple would tell Wade in a way that harmed their image. The others then looked at him uneasily, as he added that it was about the truth, especially regarding the mundanes. Meanwhile, Wade met again the first-class citizen he attacked days ago. What confused him more was the many identical copies. Anton began dressing him, while saying they were foolish to see citizens as superior. He then told him he had something to show, and asked if he recalled that day. Wade heard this and fell into deep thought. He said he recalled attacking as a white ape, though Dean told him it was a hallucination. Anton quickly argued fainting was DSD's cover, since losing a clone was trivial. However, he revealed Wade's out-of-control actions truly happened. While the clone he destroyed was simply turned into new material, just nearby, he saw the same man calling him a mutant worker. He cursed at him and accused him of slacking off again. He even threatened to kick him, but suddenly he collapsed. His face hit the ground hard, yet he continued cursing. Wade quickly asked what was going on, but Anton said to hold questions. He asked him to power off the clone instead. Though confused, he pressed the force off button. Then he aimed it at the man on the ground. The man's body began to tremble. Soon, his face split open and melted into branching structures. Anton explained this was regression, where a cell returns to nature. He also added that the circular object in it was a gnosis core built by DSD. However, Wade remained puzzled by artificial consciousness, so he said the red beam before granted powers yet disrupted mind and body. Lacking consciousness, the body reverted to matter and nature. However, being powered wasn't about body change but keeping humanity, so ordinary humans would collapse and merge with nature. But he emphasized that the mutant's energy was not always stable. Thus, he revealed the collar's cells acted as stabilizers for the wearer's mind. So DSD made artificial consciousness, and city dwellers lived only as cell providers. Upon learning this, Wade asked why clones were made to harm mutant. Anton replied that it was the result of the DSD's own design. He explained a single memory could stop a breakdown. The most effective way to reinforce memory was through intense emotion. So pain was used, and the temple used suffering firsthand. But DSD made clones instead to cause pain and erased it with a device. After saying this, he asked Wade which path he'd take. After learning the truth, Wade lowered his head after being asked. Then he questioned whether his choice even mattered. He pointed out neither side spared mutants, as DSD lied and the temple was cruel. Anton said their sacrifices aimed to free everyone, but he suddenly heard footsteps. So he urged him to leave it aside and seek the temple for the answer. With footsteps growing louder, he pressed him to come. But just as he said there was no time, a creature appeared behind. In an instant he was pierced through. He was hauled into the air and scolded for wasting time. Still, he claimed he could persuade Wade, but the person said that he had never asked him to convince him. He reminded him his only task was luring the white ape boy. He even pointed out that Ivory agreed, as it continued to snarl. Setting that aside, he turned to Wade's scar and recognized his worth. However, Wade only looks at him in confusion. He then asked if he knew Anton, and said sorry for burying him without noticing the scar. He laughed and admitted it had been his mistake. But he added that this time would be different. He removed his pinky and vowed not to let him escape again. With that being said, he threw the finger toward him. Wade continued watching in confusion, but he saw it land beside him. Before he could move, the surroundings erupted in a violent explosion. The blast was so powerful that it reached far beyond the area. Dean's group saw it and concluded Wade was inside the old collar factory. While Luke thought of how unhinged Mushroom was, Dean ordered Wade's retrieval. He insisted Wade be returned alive and that he trusted his ability. After realizing Dean knew, he grew annoyed that his secret couldn't last. Meanwhile, Dean prepared to take Ritter to the refugee center and await orders. Back at the plant, smoke filled the entire area, yet a figure still stood within the flames. It was Wade, and he felt relieved he had potion left for one more transformation. But as he wondered if he survived, he coughed blood. He then stared at his wounds and realized his healing had stopped. Suddenly, Mushroom walked toward him, claiming he had mistaken him. He claimed his gift was wasted before, yet it now proved useful by healing his finger quickly. However, he saw Wade passing out and demanded he heal himself. Wade's fading consciousness told him he wasn't ready to die. Suddenly, he saw his falling figure and heard it say it had waited for him. Then it looked at him and called him Dad. Meanwhile, outside, Mushroom stepped on Wade and thought he died too fast, but he felt relieved after feeling air from Wade's nose. He then proceeded to order Ivory to take Wade and Anton back to the temple. But just as Ivory reached for him, Wade began to sweat heavily. Inside his mind he saw his own image, greeting him for his expected arrival. His brows furrowed, as it claimed it had waited for him to give life and called him Dad. It even said that it had something to show him. And at that moment, Wade awoke as his scar ignited. His afterimage trembled, and he felt his body grow unbearably hot. Soon the scar across his body lit up completely. Mushroom noticed a red glow forming nearby, and assumed it was an energy surge, but he quickly grew uneasy when he realized it was Higan energy. He finally realized that Wade had awakened his scar, so he ordered Ivory to let him go. Yet before Ivory could react, Wade's body flared with power. His form expanded into a monstrous shape, and his eyes filled with killing intent. Mushroom noticed this and initially thought he had gone berserk, but he soon realized the Higan energy had stabilized. He also felt immense power within, and marveled that a novice could wield it so steadily. He admitted Wade was the first ape donor to awaken, which made him a threat, yet this thought actually excited him. Wade soon returned to his human form. However, he sensed a familiar voice and an unfamiliar force within. He then saw flames around him, but felt no heat. Moreover, the pain was gone, and was replaced by boundless energy. However, he was baffled when Mushroom asked if having Higan in him felt good. Knowing he wanted clarity, Mushroom asked if he would join or oppose the temple. But he warned that no matter his decision, he would settle the score for Ivory. Just as he said this, a fist appeared in front of his face. Wade struck him and asked if he was done talking. After delivering the blow, he felt satisfied by the strength and absence of pain. Mushroom was sent spiraling but still praised the punch. He even tossed his hand forward, saying he was giving a thumbs up. Wade was startled to see it. He quickly thought of how one finger birthed a giant fireball, so a full hand should be worse. Yet the hand only caused a small blast before him, so he looked up wondering if that was all. But a tiny black marble suddenly appeared and dragged all toward it, so he quickly realized he was about to be sucked in. Meanwhile, Mushroom sat down and cursed him. Then he asked if Wade thought he was the only one with Higan energy. As Wade was pulled in, he retracted the marble, saying he had no intent to kill him, so Wade instead dropped back onto the ground. He then continued, saying that he only meant to teach him a lesson. Thus, he released his power to prove the gap between a drop and a storm. But he first introduced himself as one of the 10 gods of the temple. He said he's the god of destruction Nafran, also called Mushroom. He described his power as nothing more than releasing cell energy, so he urged Wade to show what he could do. Wade charged at him once more like a raging bull. He then responded by exhaling toward him. As the attack reached Wade, he asked if he knew about epithelial cells. Wade's body then erupted, as he said it produced atomic power enough to scatter a man. Wade was indeed thrown back, but he quickly rose as his body regenerated. As he charged again, Nafran observed his rapid healing was mere primitive instinct, so he asked if Luke never explained the gap between abilities and skill. Setting that aside, he began exhaling again to craft different explosions, yet Wade continued rushing forward despite the attacks. When he was struck again, Nafran declared that this was true power. Then he looked at him, saying raw ability made him no better than a beast. Regardless, he thought Wade must now see the gap between them, so he pressed down on him while declaring he's unworthy of the power, and that no matter how hard he tried, he would never stand a chance. He then looked at Ivory and asked whether he could bring Wade to the temple, but Ivory's body began to disintegrate. He reverted to human form and shouted no. He admitted the counter left him drained and he'd shrunk, so it puzzled him that such a gap existed though they shared the same scar. But Nafran denied he shrunk, so he shouted he could grow 66 feet tall. Yet his power faded, and Nafran advised him to stop proving himself lest he shrink. He then thought of calling Malrit, though he disliked her rough handling. However, his attention shifted when debris nearby began to shake. His eyes widened as he heard a voice ask if he needed a hand. Mechanical limbs then emerged from the ground and wrapped around Wade's body. Nafran quickly looked up and immediately recognized that it was Luke's doing. With a machine positioned behind him, Luke remarked that it had been a while. He also remarked that he had recently been the center of attention. Nafran pressed his palm while remarking he carried heavier duties than Luke. However, Luke calmly deduced his plan of firing a palm blast as an energy wave, and that he planned to recover the palm Ivory buried to seize Wade. He then warned that since nothing escaped him, any reckless act was pointless. Nafran admitted he lived up to his reputation, as if he could see the future. But he knew that it was not his power, and he began twisting his fingers behind. He insisted Luke only deduced, and if he couldn't watch, there'd be nothing to play at. Luke's gaze sharpened as he replied that he underestimated him. Suddenly, Ivory appeared behind, mirroring Luke's words about being gone too long. Nafran realized it and remarked he hadn't been told Luke could control minds. Just then, multiple messengers appeared despite his orders not to be disturbed. But he observed the crosses in their eyes, and Luke confirmed they were his. He remarked that he kept these brain-dead souls alive and treated them like children. Nafran soon found himself surrounded. He began complaining that Luke and the others always treated him as a fool. As he remarked, Luke was seen as the cleverest. The flames around him retract. Then it crystallized as he planned to see which of them was stronger. The area soon shook with blasts as he tested if intellect or sheer strength would triumph. His explosions continued to ravage the area. So, Luke fought back by synchronizing brainwaves, which caused the messengers and Ivory to collapse. Amid the chaos, Nafran remained suspended in the air. Luke saw this and knew it's due to his Higan link like Wade's scar. He concluded Wade was the right subject, but he needed to make it alive first. Meanwhile, Nafran continued to display his power. He even asked Luke how he felt witnessing this energy that he named Higan, but he also faulted Luke for stagnation, so the temple became ruthless after his departure. And in a year they reached Higan, and gained power at the expense of lives. Luke confessed he feared Higan energy, and that temple ignorance drove him away. However, he said he was now close to Higan's secrets, and he won't stop. He then picked up Wade and thanked him for almost making his brain dead. Since now, he intended to use Wade's body to experience Higan directly. As he transmitted brain activity, Wade began to respond. His eyes opened, and Luke looked on to see what occurred when a body touched Higan. But what he witnessed next surprised him. Though he could still perceive through sight, all physical matter seemed to vanish. He looked deeper and saw a space filled with energy. The realm overflowed with superpower radiation pointing to its origin. Moreover, he felt time fade and sensed hostility, but left the exploration for later. Even so, this clearly showed him Higan's depth, and he recognized it stood apart. He then finally closed his eyes and let Wade's open as he said such power was truly godlike. He also urged Wade to recall all after waking as it was vital for Higan. However, Nafran cut in asking what he was muttering. He then angrily pointed out that he was still standing right there. But he already felt irritated at being ignored and launched another attack. Luke focused his gaze and saw Higan's flow behind him. At the same time, something flickered behind them. They saw another surge of Higan energy erupted and triggered another explosion. As light filled the space, Nafran said Luke's clever tricks could not defeat him. With Higan sucking everything, Nafran said Luke's calculations were void in that realm. He jeered, saying Luke's consciousness would linger then collapse into Higan. Luke's form began to fade, yet he calmly replied that he understood. He then smiled and said he did not like the outcome, so he snapped his fingers, and their surroundings began to fracture. Nafran watched in shock as everything around him shattered. When it finally broke apart, he wondered if it was a tear in space and time. However, he soon noticed his arm healing too quickly, which made him think as if it had never been damaged at all. He also saw the calm surroundings and realized none of it had truly happened. So he asked Luke if he could truly control time since no one ever had. Luke said such power was unreal and explained he only predicted through brain waves, but through Wade's link, his power advanced and narrowed outcomes better, where he can even share what he perceived with others. Hearing this, Nafran declared it absurd and pointed out his power wouldn't last. He powered up again and pointed out his amplified Higgin link surpassed Luke's. He then proceeded to lunge forward, unleashing an imaginary number attack. While airborne, he materialized a mirror. Then he planted his foot against it and used it to propel himself forward. He repeated this movement, and soon he surrounded Luke. However, Luke quickly grasped the nature of the imaginary number. He deduced that detonating a cell layer formed a Higgin barrier. With Higgin's power, the barrier split and the tear acted as a stabilizer. This let real space turn unstable, and when the barrier fell, it exploded. Moreover, the same process in Higgin meant simultaneous blasts across realms. He found the concept ingenious, though he doubted Nafran had devised it alone, and even though the technique was sharp, it was ultimately flawed against him. He revealed Wade could remain in Higgin mentally while shifting his form. More importantly, his sway over Higgin let him manipulate reality itself, so he guided Wade's arm deeper into Higgin. Before long, he found Nafran's projection inside the realm. He quickly grasped him and destroyed him. Meanwhile, Nafran stayed confident and sarcastically asked about Luke's calculations, but his expression faltered when he sensed something collapsing behind him. The mirrors exploded, and the impact reached Luke's machine. Soon the surrounding space began to tear apart. But Nafran already expected this, and noted creating realities will drain Luke, so he unleashed explosions, and was determined to be the last standing. The light from the blast grew intense, yet Luke's machine endured. It absorbed the explosions, and restored itself as if nothing had happened. Nafran, who's now on the ground, was left confused, especially when he realized his body had not yet recovered. Luke admitted the strain, but he did create simulated realities. So what Nafran saw was simply his chosen version. Nafran was then shaken to hear that he actually chose reality. Still, he argued Luke's power came solely from Wade, and without Higgin energy he is nothing. So he shouted that nothing had truly changed. But his words were cut short when another figure appeared nearby. It was the god of thunder, who told him to stop embarrassing himself. He also claimed Nafran's tech edge was useless against an old man, so he demanded a reason to keep him alive. Nafran protested Luke's reliance on Wade, but he was stopped. Thunder said he would spare him but strip his title. After that, he instructed Mulrit to take him away. Mulrit quickly obeyed by drawing Nafran and the other temple members into the ground. After they disappeared, Thunder looked upward, but he only saw Luke watching with a faint smile. He then attempted to intimidate him with a surge of lightning, but it quickly dissipated. He then looked ahead and saw Dean, who remarked that it was getting late, so he told him to return to the temple. Thunder recognized Dean as the Sea Destroyer and admitted he couldn't defeat them at once, but Dean was surprised the title spread, so he said he traumatized them. Setting that aside, he asked him if still meant to support Luke and fight them. Dean replied that Luke and Wade were his people, so he better let it go. He then erased the debris nearby and warned he would show why he was the Sea Destroyer. Thunder replied it would not happen today, but promised the time would come. With that, he vanished, saying they would meet again. Dean sighed in relief and took out his energy bars, but he still asked Luke if his old friend was a strong foe. While helping Wade, Luke confirmed it and said it's good he didn't fight them. With that being said, he began to explain what had happened earlier, but Dean raised his hand and said there was no need. He said everyone had a past, and his might be worse. Furthermore, they'd known each other 20 years, so asking now would be insulting. Luke was briefly taken aback by this, but soon agreed. He then continued helping Wade, and said Dean relied on judgment even after the truth. However, Dean claimed ignorance of his identity, and Luke felt he was acting dumb, so he set it aside and told him to regroup with the others. But Dean insisted he didn't know his identity, so Luke said it was fine. Dean was then left yelling he was serious, and asked to be taken since he could not fly. Meanwhile, in the ruined city, a man emerged from Higgin into the physical world. He struggled to maintain his balance and began drifting, so he hurriedly grabbed onto a nearby piece of metal. He then began saying the dead's knowledge was lacking, as he fought to control his body, yet he also noted that everything was proceeding according to plan. His face flickered as he declared that his goal would soon be realized. Suddenly, he spotted another Higgin opening, and said this was the moment he awaited. Another figure emerged from it, and he stated that he would begin with his first target. An hour later at the old guard post, Dean was busy on a call. After reminding Zach to stay safe, Nisha asked what they would do next. But when he turned around, he was caught off guard by her appearance. She quickly explained their uniforms were ruined, so they found extras and offered him one. But they glanced at Tara, and she pointed out that it might not fit him. When Tara's buttons suddenly popped off, he decided to hand it to her instead. At that moment, Luke suddenly called them over. Hence, Dean asked about the main office, but Luke replied the network was out. He added they lost office contact, and Unit 3's leader left for her team. In response, Dean told him about Zack guarding the seeds, and Luke began to share intel. He revealed most agents defected, and the temple arranged early eliminations to limit damage. However, the remaining ones were unstable, and pursuit could spiral out of control. Dean figured it would be difficult, and their only choice was the headquarters. Just then, Ritter raised his hand and said that he might have a solution. Upon hearing this, Dean asked if he knew a way to contact headquarters. Ritter replied that not exactly, and began searching through his coat. He displayed a quantum communicator and said it was a receiver with HQ symbols. While Dean said he wanted one, Luke questioned the symbols. Ritter confessed this was the first time it happened, yet he still identified the final symbol as "Do Not Return." He then feared HQ was in trouble, and Luke asked Dean what's next. Dean said orders were orders, but he'd still go, which surprised Ritter. He tried to stop him due to the warning, but he remained curious. Setting that aside, he looked at Wade and asked why he sat still. Wade remained staring at his hands, and Luke explained it was his task. Wade then focused his left eye, and Hagen energy began to glow as he grasped it. Soon, half of his body was absorbed into the cross, and he vanished into thin air. Ritter and Dean were stunned by the sight, but their shock deepened when he suddenly reappeared behind. The area soon flickered with Hagen traces, as Wade phased rapidly. Suddenly, Luke asked his thoughts, and he said he disliked the memories rushing back, but he now felt clear-minded and handled his power smoothly. He demonstrated it by striking himself and reappearing elsewhere. He could even now separate his body parts in different places. He also shifted into a muscular form, and Dean asked Luke if he taught him that. However, Luke replied that he had not. Nisha then clenched her fist as he watched him easily transform and instinctively touched her scar. On the other hand, Dean told them to rest early and ignored Ritter and the others. Tara heard this and quickly went to find food and supplies at the guard post. Later that night, Wade sprawled on the ground snoring. Suddenly, someone reached out and called for him to wake up. He then opened his eyes and was confused to see Nisha. So she said she had questions, especially about his ability and scar. When she asked about the scar, he lifted his shirt, but she said that wasn't the point. She explained she first thought their shared mark was coincidence, but after the explosion earlier that day, her scar had begun to feel strange. So she asked if he knew why, and he admitted he didn't. She then asked if he knew how he got it, and he again said no. When she pressed about its function, he still had no answer, so she fell silent, and he asked if she had any more questions. She said no and turned away, but he suddenly said he saw something. He explained he once doubted his sight, yet now he saw it plainly. He pointed out that there was something glowing above her head. Hearing this, she asked if she could see it too. However, her response made him wonder if he had it as well. She said yes, and she described it as a shimmer, but he only saw a beam on her. He then explained that her light seemed connected to Hagen. To demonstrate, he showed her how he could reach into that dimension. He extended his hand into it and tried to explore what lay on her side. He carefully opened a path into her cross and asked her to stay still. He even leaned in to take a closer look, but he saw nothing, which did not surprise him, so he finally withdrew and closed it. Moments after he left, a woman briefly appeared in that space. She glanced toward where he had been while hiding. Back in reality, Wade said there was nothing and asked how far her scar went. He showed his scar ran from foot to head, though near his heart felt different since he could force flames out. She said she felt it too, and it's strongest in her eyes. Since even she's used to heat, her eyes still felt uncomfortable. He then suggested she show the rest of her scar, and she agreed. As she removed her jacket, she said it once stopped at her stomach, but was growing. While they examined it, someone nearby noticed their movements. It was Tara, and she was horrified by what they were doing. Nisha said her scar reached her thigh, and she began to loosen her belt. Tara quickly ordered them to stop, but another voice echoed the same command, so all three turned toward the sound. The area fell silent as they spotted Dean and Luke. A moment later, both sides began accusing each other of spying. The next morning, Dean said the packed supplies would be useful with events unclear. Then he looked at Wade and Nisha and admitted he was surprised, since even though he only took Wade in for luck, the two seemed connected. Luke then said Wade's powers are enough, but Dean wondered if the temple knew of the scar. Luke said he was not sure, as he had never heard anyone there mention them, so Dean suggested Wade's childhood recollections and Nisha's case might provide clarity. However, Luke said Wade's captor also had a scar, so the temple might know. Ritter heard this and mentioned he remembered something tied to it. He told them researchers found a new dimension by tracking gravitational waves. Luke quickly asked if he meant Hagen, and he said some researchers use that name. But Luke grew suspicious, since the researchers used the same term as the temple. Ritter also revealed the test subjects all had powers and a red scar. So higher-ups ordered him to see if Wade had the scar, and he now confirmed it. So he looked at Wade and insisted they take him to headquarters. But Dean covered Wade and said not now. He insisted they concentrate only on the task at hand. So he asked Ritter if he understood. Ritter heard this and quickly agreed. After that, Dean asked if everyone was ready and told them to move out. Suddenly, someone asked if they'd go on foot since the headquarters is too far. Dean replied they would fly, but Luke warned his jet lacked capacity. So he explained he wouldn't use the jet since he often snuck out here. He revealed a nearby shapeshifter camp and planned to ask for use of their railroad. He explained the capital had expelled them, and his steady trades left them indebted to him. Luke then said the inventory gaps were clear, which left Ritter uneasy over his smuggling. But Luke and Dean hushed him, so he brushed it off as a friendly deal. Luke then noted the collars might be failing, as their devices were old and frequently offline. But Dean noted he had replaced them last month, so he chastised him for abusing his role. Suddenly, a howl and rustling came from the bushes. Soon after, a white wolf emerged from the forest. Dean frowned, sensing a bad sign and prepared to act, but a figure dashed in and struck it down while yelling for him to stop. After pinning the wolf to the ground, a young woman stepped forward. Her voice trembled as she begged them not to harm her father. When Dean saw her, he asked if she was Emmy. Then he recalled a small wolf from before. But Emmy angrily declared she never resembled that in her younger days. Suddenly, her father called out to Dean. He thanked him and asked him to look after Emmy. Seeing this, Emmy begged Dean to help her father. Dean told her to calm down and asked Luke to examine him. Luke saw the white ape form starting and would die before finishing, so he questioned how this had happened, since exiles rarely lost control so easily. He then takes out a syringe to seal powers and suspends him, but they must act fast. After injecting the serum, he explained that it would only last for 7 days. The wolf let out a pained growl as the effect took hold. Luke then added that if they failed to find a solution within that time, all the shapeshifters would eventually evolve into white apes. He turned to Emmy and asked if she wanted the same shot. As Tara fixed her clothes, Dean said it was needless since she was born superhuman. Luke was surprised and said such cases were rare. He remarked, radiation impairs fertility, yet rare cases permit it, so it's worth studying. Wade heard this and asked about reproductive organs, but Nisha said she didn't know. Meanwhile, Dean asked Emmy if others in her village had ended up like her father, but she said she did not know. She explained strangers came promising to fix them, and many agreed. But they all suddenly turned on each other, and the strangers left with the unaffected. They also tried to seize her as a natural superhuman, yet her father intervened. After that, he spiraled further, leaving her for safety until they found him. Luke thought the temple was behind it, and Dean pushed to inspect the villagers. He added that if they couldn't be saved, they might have to put them down, so he hoped that Emmy understood. She replied she'd rather die human, and honored his choice since he gave them good lives. Just then, she suddenly caught a scent, and Wade also heard movement nearby, so both of them said at the same time that something was approaching. They braced as rustling grew louder, and Emmy called out the name Uncle Barrett. Moments later, a bear emerged from the bushes. It stepped forward and called Emmy's name, but half of its body had already become monstrous. The monstrous figure appeared before them and roared. Emmy's hair quickly stood on end as she said she had a bad feeling. Dean agreed and pressed Luke to identify it, to which Luke said he needed a tissue sample. As he studied the creature, something about its hands felt familiar. Not long after, he remembered where he saw the hands, so shouted it was one of the hybrids they'd met back when Wade joined. Wade then pressed them to run, and warned it would consume anyone who got close. Upon hearing this, Emmy was obviously shocked. They both then began dodging frantically as the creature attacked. Its eyes suddenly glowed red, and an arm shot out from its mouth. Wade stopped midair, and Emmy too was trapped by an invisible grip, so Luke quickly deployed his drones to assess the situation. Using his enhanced vision, he traced the telekinetic force coming from the creature's mouth. He then guessed it was a fusion of two bodies with new powers. Dean realized its danger and decided to step in. He removed his mask and told Nisha to stay back. Luke quickly warned him his prosthetics were failing, and the foe was too powerful, but he just readied his weapons and said Luke could handle the cleanup. At the same time, Wade attempted to escape. He opened a path into Hegan and struck the creature's tough face, but Emmy shouted in protest that he'd easily smashed Barrett's face. In response, he tells her that he could still feel that it was alive. Upon looking closer, they saw animals moving inside the creature's body. Emmy recoiled at seeing her friends, but Dean warned they were no longer the same, so he unleashed a surge of nuclear energy and destroyed the creature's body. Yet he still pointed out that its outer layer was only flesh, so it would regenerate unless they dealt real damage. He pulled out his gear and asked Luke to check for a vital organ. Luke focused his vision and detected something unusual. He looked closer and saw a core marked Project Nephilim. Dean suddenly asked if he had found the weak point, but before he could answer, Dean admitted that he might have underestimated it, since his body could not hold on much longer. Luke finally said that he had located something resembling an artificial human core. However, the name carved into it was familiar, and he hated it. Dean acknowledged this, but reminded him that there was no turning back. He declared they'd risk it and sent thermal radiation into his hand. He combined his power, and he unleashed an intense burst. The attack tore through the surroundings and was about to strike its target, but the creature opened its mouth and swallowed it. Its body rapidly expanded and exploded under the force of the attack. Seeing it vanished, Dean muttered that he almost thought it would survive, but his final strike cost him his arms, and he told Wade to see if the creature was dead. Wade and Emmy were finally released, so Wade quickly stood up to follow the order. He approached the remains carefully and fortified his arm. After confirming it was gone, he moved to seize the core inside, but Luke shouted for him to not touch it. He warned that it was still alive and foresaw him being pierced. Wade turned back in confusion, but in that instant, the monster reformed around the core. Then it pierced through his body. Yet the creature suddenly halted and fixed its gaze on him. It muttered that he felt familiar, and found he can switch between human and ape. Deep within the core, a severed head excitedly proclaimed Wade a Nephilim. At the same time, Luke rushed toward Dean, but he only finds his body badly damaged. He then looked closer and saw the similar Nephilim core, and finally understood. Nephilim were known to be hybrids carrying human souls and angelic strength, so they are what the government intended superhumans to be. Just then, he heard the creature called Wade a born Nephilim. This made him think the temple had forged Nephilim. He also began questioning Wade's identity, as the creature recognized him. Suddenly, the Nephilim declared Wade was complete and must die, yet he also called it a waste as saints fought over him. He had heard of the sacred altar chaos, yet he warned he was no weak foe. He revealed that just earlier, he had feasted on a village of inferior beings. Emmy froze in shock, hearing this, and her eyes trembled in anger. Rage took over, and she charged forward, vowing to kill him. But the Nephilim casually extended a mass of flesh from his body. Then he struck her mid-charge, and sent her flying. The force knocked her unconscious before she even hit the ground, so he dismissed her as nothing more than a nuisance. Before he could continue, his hand was suddenly pierced. Wade continued to counter using Higan. Then he forced himself away, while the Nephilim's arms burst. His wounds mended at once, and the Nephilim realized why Higan's power was desired. He described the cross and power as true Nephilim essence, so his face twisted with jealousy as he said Wade must feel like a god. But he declared it would soon be his, and he unleashed his strength. Luke finally confirmed it had abilities, yet he's puzzled over where he inherited those. Suddenly Tara arrived and was horrified to see Dean's condition. So, he tells her the recycler is working, but energy would soon fail. Hearing this, Tara and Nisha were filled with worry. So, he said he'd channel a little energy, but not enough to keep the suit running. Tara finally dropped to her knees, asking why Dean pushed so far to play hero. Nisha then listened, as Tara said his act wasn't heroic and feared losing him. But Luke told her to stop crying because this was not the time for it. He lifted Dean and decided to seek stronger prosthetics. After he said he'd take Ritter and Emmy, he warned them not to take Wade to the HQ. He also glanced at Nisha, and she straightened immediately. He told her it would be best to stay with Wade and continue monitoring her scar. He then mounted his drone and urged them to carry Wade away while he fought the Nephilim. Most importantly, he told them to stay alive. As the drone lifted away, the ground beneath them began to crack. Luke's machine rose from below, which made the Nephilim look back and curse it. The robot then stomped hard and crushed the Nephilim beneath its foot. The girls seized the moment and rushed to Wade, asking about his chest wound. He assured them he was fine and even said he'd carry them to move quicker. Both of them were clearly surprised, but he did not wait and quickly picked them up. Then he began running away with them. At the same time, Luke took off into the air, but he soon coughed up blood and realized he had pushed himself too far. So he looked at his hand and reminded himself to be careful for Wade's sake. Back on the ground, the robot's stance broke as the Nephilim cried villains don't die. So he forced himself free and wondered if Wade's group knew that. He then proceeded to pierce his own chest and tore out his core. Then he leaned back, declaring that nothing like this could stop him. So he flung the core into the air. Meanwhile, Wade continued running with the others. Tara told him to slow down, thinking they had escaped, since the speed was making her sick. But Wade remained focused ahead. He sensed danger and hurled them aside as the attack rushed in. When they looked up, they saw the Nephilim again, now in another form. He quickly caught Wade in his hand and grinned, asking where he thought he was going. Then he tightened his grip to crush Wade's body until it burst. Seeing this, Nisha and Tara cried out his name in panic. In the next instant, a surge of Higan energy erupted. The Nephilim was hit, and it tore through its body. When the light cleared, Wade stood there in his suit. Nisha fell silent at the sight, While Tara was visibly relieved, she then called out to him, but he gave no response. Unbeknown to them, the Nephilim's core had attached itself to his back. From there, it said quietly that Wade's suit was better than he imagined. Meanwhile, in a city, someone urged Wade to wake up. Upon seeing his eyes open, an old man immediately asked if he was all right. The driver, on the other hand, began saying he shouldn't have crossed a red light. Hearing this, the old man scolds him for dodging fault, yet he claimed it was true. Meanwhile, people around found it strange, since Wade had been hurled high, and as they pointed out, he was unscathed. Wade's face suddenly changed. The then driver offered to take him to the hospital, but Wade said he was fine. He then looked around in confusion, wondering where he was. While bystanders suspected a head injury, the driver planned to leave since Wade said he was fine. As the driver left, Wade concluded they were ordinary humans but friendly. Suddenly, a sharp pain struck his head. Unfamiliar fragments surfaced like the name Colby, a girl, and a door, so he questioned what those visions meant. Later, as he roamed, the place felt like the capital's elite quarter, yet empty of superhumans, and when he caught his reflection in a glass wall, he froze. He stared at his face and wondered which self was real. At the same time, in a monitoring room, a report came in about an unusual reading. The professor asked what it was. They found it tied to Lab 03's negative SP, and the assistant speculated on its meaning. The professor then cursed that a subject in the extended world had gained consciousness. He quickly ordered all labs to disconnect and called an emergency core meeting. Then he instructed Klein to sign out at once, but he received no response and repeated the order. Inside a pod, Klein finally reacted. The professor's voice echoed from the Nephilim core and told him to exit. Klein expressed reluctance hearing this. He regrets leaving a good gene, but the professor pressed urgent matters, so he reluctantly agreed, and soon his body went limp. Back in the monitoring room, the professor confessed this was unforeseen. Meanwhile, inside a restaurant, Wade was asked what he would like to drink, but he only asked if he could choose from what was offered, so the server confirmed that he could order whatever he liked. Yet the word order itself confused him, which surprised the staff. Later, once he managed to pay, they quietly noted his ignorance of phone use. Wade, on the other hand, eyed the bubble tea. Knowing Colby loved it, he began sipping it and found it sweet with chewy pearls. His eyes then widened at how tasty it was, and he was moved to tears for having it first time. But this also struck him that he was Wade inside Colby's body, so he wondered if this was a memory from Luke and questioned the place. He looked around, wondering if this was the headquarters of Superhuman Defense, but he did not see anyone with powers, and it felt like one of Dean's comic books. He also carried Colby's memories, where even the once painful now seemed beautiful to him, and he found them sweet as he thought about how nice they were. However, he realized this was not the time to reminisce. He remembered the Nephilim crushed his head and took his body that sent him to Hegan. He suffered a head injury and soon returned from trance. But this time was different, and he could not feel his body. He only felt himself sinking or rising. Then he saw something he did not understand, yet somehow knew. He realized it was the essence of Hegan and the end of universes. His soul left drawn to the brightest light ending in the farthest place. After that he became Colby. Upon remembering this, he saw himself in control and asked if it would last forever. Suddenly he recalled the truck certainly broke his bones, but he felt normal. So he looked at his finger and wondered if he could use his powers here. He then tried to touch the glass wall, and it began to crack. Soon the glass shattered completely. As the server asked if he was hurt, he felt relieved to know his power was working. While he reflected on his body's power, the server and the man looked at him nervously. Yet he ignored this, and considered generating energy to enter Hegan and regain himself. He decided to try, and also wondered if he had become smarter like Colby. He began to focus, and a scar appeared on his face. It also spread down his neck, so the server shouted it didn't look like a glass cut. He then began to glow on succeeding, and made people jump back away from him. Just then, an eye marked with a cross began to awaken after sensing his superpower. The people around him were affected and suddenly controlled. On the cross-eye's command, they began to approach him. They reached out to him, and asked who he was and why he had power. So he hurriedly ran away from them. Then he tore open Hegan, and finally felt his body inside. Yet when he tried to reach for it, he couldn't leave his body. Suddenly, the portal began to draw his soul out through Colby's mouth. He found himself reliving the sensation of leaving his physical shell. Soon, Colby's body went unconscious, and was dragged by the others until he fell to the ground. The people looked at him and realized Wade had disappeared. Upon learning this, their eyes returned to normal. All of them then glanced about in shock, and were unsure what occurred. At the same time, Colby woke up with a sharp pain in his head. Back in the other realm, Wade realized this was the way to his body. While on it, he wished he could bring everyone to where he went if it was true, because the place he had reached was extraordinary. Meanwhile, in the meeting, the professor asked for suggestions to solve the problem. However, someone asked if handling was even the right word. The woman asked if the deep diver had taken something when it escaped, and if he grasped the implications. The others replied that he certainly did, since he was the one who made the rules. The smoker claimed he was never trustworthy, and feared radiation would draw those things in. However, the professor asked if they were finished. He then scolded them, saying all they had done was lecture him. But just as he restated the meeting's purpose, his body quivered. His demeanor changed as he told them he would provide all the details. He advised all research centers to prepare as things might soon get busy. He stressed they had a subject with free access to Higan, which astonished them. He then slipped off his glasses and reminded them it was bound to happen, so he asked which lab the subject had escaped from. The assistant quickly responded that the place was Lab 03 of Eureka. Hearing it, he wondered if that was the reality of the missing subject, and he agreed. He then linked the fragment to his clone, prompting questions about disclosure to the others, so he assured them his clone will lose memories, and only has innate knowledge endured. Hearing this, the others urged eliminating him quickly to remove all risks. Some eagerly agreed since they did not want their reality to become like those in lab. She also added they'd invested too much in the labs to protect reality. So, as the Cordova logistics consultant, Tori refused to let things spiral out of control. But some debated Lab 03, since its data showed promise. He also stated that reality could yield stable powers within 3 years. So, he argued it was too cautious to halt progress over one mistake. Suddenly, Klein suddenly shared he'd met someone with extraordinary genes while diving. He noted the individual's strength and ability to draw Higan's energy to heal. But after detailing the person's entry and exit from Higan, his expression turned to fear. He noticed everyone's eyes on him and rebuked him for luring Wade. Meanwhile, the professor raised a finger and asked him about the person he met. He then projected an image of Wade and asked if it was him. Klein confirmed it and added people in 03 lacked strength but could process energy. He also noted some collapsed and transformed into the white ape. Yet Wade was different because he's strong with many energy-linked mutations. Tori saw him as a threat, but the other man insisted Wade was new and fit their search. The Science Association president Tim argued Wade was manageable and fit as a prototype. Someone also pointed out Wade was more evolved than the rest. So he suggested observing how quickly Wade could clear 03, as done in Lab 05, and they could seek more funding by having clients witness the experiment. But the others called it insane, and insisted test subjects didn't deserve such treatment. The priest even said responsibility would be his if Higan went wild. Another man also blamed him for profit-seeking when the matter was greater. He then turned to the two individuals nearby and asked them to speak, but the man and the woman remained silent. The others quickly understood what was happening behind them. After all, faint noises could be heard coming from the two. Everyone fell silent after this. Not long after, the professor pressed for a verdict as the subject's superpower radiation spread. They all began thinking and pulled out their phones. After a while, they declared that they would keep 03 for now. The professor's eyes then lit up and said okay, but his order was to flood the lab with divers and destroy every risk and subject. This confused Tim, and he reminded him that he asked them to decide. Just then, they all felt the power of the cross-marked eye flood their minds. The professor staggered as the force surged through him. After regaining his footing, he cursed and said it was happening again. He even shouted that he was turning. Klein immediately asked if he was all right, but instead of answering, he took out a syringe. Then he stabbed himself to stop changing. The other core members followed and injected themselves as well. One of them quickly grabbed an anti-superhuman shot and drove it into his body. After it, he wondered if the monster sought discord or simply acted on impulse. The group tested began texting trust and leaders. They said they only wanted the subject's value, and the monster was their enemy. After reviewing the messages, the Higan priest found them incomplete. Just then, Eagle said, the monster feared 03, and it's perfect to end it. The professor also caught the note on their disclosure, so he asked if the infected was handled, and the assistant said it was done. Earlier, armed bald men thanked the witnesses for their sacrifice and shot them. The group immediately left after doing this, and leave the bodies behind on the ground, including Colby. But his eyes began to move, and he drew in a breath as the red in his pupils spread. Meanwhile, a core member raised his glass to celebrate humanity's rescue again. He even claimed they were closer to erasing that unsettling presence. In response, the others raised their glasses as well. They all declared it was for humanity's future glory and for the progress of their alliance. Just then, the couple was told all was handled, but the man scolded the messenger. He told him to leave, and stressing no one enters the isolation room unapproved. But this made the woman ask if he was sure the monster wasn't watching inside. She looked around uneasily and admitted she was not convinced, but the professor said to trust him, since he'd done it countless times. He assured her the lab report meant they could kill the monster anytime. As he boasted of their strength, the monster was already observing. The unseen watcher expressed excitement and gratitude to Professor Hutch. It remarked on being reconnected to Lab 03 and the vessels assembled here, so it declared that it was time for the next phase. However, when it tried to press the button, it hesitated. It thought of Wade and decided that other matters needed to be handled first. At that moment, Tara saw Wade from behind, so she asked if he was all right and said he had truly frightened them, since the ball had already stopped moving, yet he had remained unconscious. So she asked how he felt and whether he remembered what had happened. As soon as she spoke, something stirred within his mind. He saw flashes of being chased and how he had returned to Higan. He also remembered shattering the glass wall and being suddenly surrounded. Remembering it all, he declared it was real and he had crossed dimensions. The girls, however, were left confused by his words. Meanwhile, at Lab 06, a massive monster ran amok. A man stepped forward and pulled his sword from behind. He leapt toward the creature and drew his blade. With a single strike, he severed its head, and the head flew into the air. After he landed firmly on the ground, he sheathed back his sword. Suddenly, another creature emerged from beneath the surface. It called him Tomo, and praised him for eliminating the 10th malignant cell this month. It then stabbed the fallen monster and said the host would soon stabilize. As it busily absorbed the corpse, he asked where they would go next. The creature appeared beside him and said it was fine to take a break. It acknowledged his impatience and reminded him too many cells remained. So, as the creature began to transform, it noted that he used his power too frequently, and after turning into a woman, she joked he might end up transforming. But that won't do, since he was their future and their hope. After saying this, she noticed her size and realized she had overdone it, but she still suggested he sit on her and take days of rest before resuming. Just then, a spark of light appeared in the sky, and flames began descending. The two of them were then forced to close their eyes as the fire approached. When it struck the ground, a woman emerged and dispersed the flames around her. She quickly commented that Tomo was quite talented for taking down another one. However, she made it clear that she did not believe in the idea of a chosen one. Hearing this, the giant woman called her Lizzie and pleaded she ease up on him, but Lizzie showed clear disdain at the use of such a nickname. Tomo quickly clarified that he had never asked to be called that. The woman then suggested they rest a few days, since they'd worked too hard. As she proposed that they visit a hot spring together, Tomo's attention shifted to the side. He looked up at the sky and saw lightning crackling across it. From the cross came Nephilim cores and declared it had joined spheres of awareness. But as they formed, they were shocked to find themselves in Lab 06. Tomo, on the other hand, had already grabbed his sword. Then he rushed forward as the Nephilim recognized him as a highly dangerous individual. While the alert continued, he swiftly cut through one of their cores. The moment he did, he realized that it was composed of Hygan energy. Because of this, his left eye was forced to open a cross portal. His companion saw it and called his name in concern. Meanwhile, the other Nephilim knew Tomo was too strong and plotted a route to 03. As he considered his consciousness might be destroyed, Lizzie rushed forward. She unleashed her flames and devoured him. As a result, the deep diver screamed inside his pod. The researchers then lost both signals and were confused. So one quickly called for medical aid and ordered disconnection at once. The monitor quickly reported the power was off, yet the connection continued. At that moment, Tomo managed to open the cross, so he began to wonder if this was what Higan was like. Meanwhile, in Lab 03, Wade assures Tara he was fine, but she insists on a full exam. She confirmed no internal bleeding, and he noted his fast healing, but she recalled he hadn't eaten in days, though normally he'd already be down. He then admitted he didn't know when it started, but only that hunger was gone. This quickly made Tara conclude that he was not in a normal state of mind, yet he insisted he had truly traveled to another dimension. However, she asked if he made the Higan opening behind, but he denied it. The cross tore open, and Tomo crawled out wondering if he was still inside Higan, but he began covering his hurting eyes, due to failed healing and Hela's absence. Suddenly, he noticed Wade's group and wondered if they were native inhabitants, but as he looked closer at Wade, he felt a sense of familiarity. Just then, his left eye regained its vision. At the same time, Wade rushed forward, declaring that he was an enemy. Tomo quickly drew his sword and asked if he had a death wish. They both charged at each other, but before they could clash, Nephilim cores suddenly appeared between them. Wade crushed one with his bare hands, while Tomo sliced the other with his sword. After destroying them, both asked at once if the other was linked to that thing. Tomo then introduced himself first and said he was a flawed hunter. Wade also introduced himself as a former sanitation worker and now in superhuman defense, but they both fell silent, as Tomo was confused by the term superhuman defense, while Wade and the girls were equally puzzled by the phrase flawed hunter. Tomo then admitted limited understanding, yet he's certain this wasn't Higan, so he reached out his hand and asked what was really going on. But Wade said he'd been to Higan, which is a strange place with no souls. Tomo was surprised to hear this and asked what Higan truly was. He even asked if he could take him there. However, they both looked down when they saw something off with their hands. They saw massive light from Higgins suddenly burst out from them. Tara looked at them worriedly, but Nisha suddenly screamed from behind. So she asked what was wrong, but she just clutched her eye and said the word Higgin. At the same time, both Tomo and Wade shouted the word Higgin. Soon after, the ground around them began to tremble. Following it, they saw many scarred faces calling out, Higgin. At that moment, Professor Hutch repeated it as well. He clutched his head in pain as his hair started turning white. Realizing it, he stared in disbelief and muttered it was impossible. But he noticed the scar forming over his own eye, so he furiously declared he was not a test subject, but the one in charge. But he continued turning, so he repeated that he's from the original universe. He then reached toward his eye, denying that he was some kind of experiment. In desperation, he tore it out. But when saw the mirror, he struggled to breathe. His eye had returned, and this proves he had turned into a monster. Meanwhile, on the other side, Tomo and Wade urged each other to let go, but they struggled against the force that kept pulling them together. Tomo was cut in the process, but his wounds quickly healed. Moreover, he could once again feel Hella's presence. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the cross asking where Tomo was. He heard this and quickly asked if it was Lizzie and Hella. Hella then happily asked him, and confessed she'd worried after losing his signal. She attempted to reach through the cross, but was instead electrocuted. So Tomo immediately told her not to touch it and said he would return soon. He drew his sword and prepared to thrust it forward. But before leaving, he asked Wade if he'd seen the same thing, and he confirmed. He added he'd seen more, and his mind was clearer there when he borrowed a body. Tomo concluded everything was too strange, so he needed to return for answers. But he knew that Wade should be able to open the portal again. So he hoped that when they met again, they could uncover the truth together. After that, he said his farewell and left them. Tara then quickly turned to Wade and demanded an explanation. She questioned the other dimension and the light when they joined hands. He began trying to organize his thoughts on how to explain. But before he could speak, Nisha suddenly said she had seen it too. She said it likely tied to the scar, since everyone in her vision had one. He then suggested they figure it out together because he couldn't do it alone. Nisha agreed, and he immediately moved forward to ask more questions. Meanwhile, Tara stood nearby, watching them discuss what she couldn't follow. After a moment of silence, she began to ask what her role was. Later, Nisha extended her hand toward Wade and asked him to come closer. She said she could feel her control over her abilities increasing as her scar grew. So she asked him to shake hands with her again, believing it might trigger something. As they ignored Tara, Wade said he's not certain, but Nisha still insisted to not lose control. He then said she had no healing, but she said Tara was there, and this annoyed Tara. They ignored her and two of them held hands, but Tara told them that was enough. She shouted at them to count her in, and quickly grabbed both of their hands. For a moment, the three held on, nervously waiting for something to happen, but nothing occurred. So they looked at each other, feeling awkward. Tara then stepped out and asked if they had both seen countless versions of Wade. However, she pointed out that she found the idea too absurd to fully accept. She explained that the multiverse was common in Dean's comics, but it was still only fiction created in the past and never scientifically proven. Wade replied that in another dimension, he was inside another body. He added that the person's thoughts were transmitted to him, yet incomprehensible. He also noted the people there do not believe in superpowers, so it's almost like inhabitants of an ancient world, and to him, it felt like they were the distorted version of their own world, so he thinks that if he explored his potential, he might bring them there. That thought made Tara pause. She gripped his hands, saying she knew his intent, yet powers were also not good here. She reminded him that power always came with pain. She also asked about his earlier words that a world without powers was beautiful, so she speculated it was because they were ordinary, which made him worry. He then apologized, noting bringing others there might turn that world into this, but she said he didn't do anything wrong, and she ruffled his head. She just advised him not to overthink, and said they should find Dean and Luke. But hearing this made Wade feel a quiet warmth. She then added that this was clearly a situation only Luke would be able to handle. So she turned around and urged them to move. Suddenly, Nisha tapped his shoulder and added that it might be obvious, but Tara was the wisest after Luke, and leaving her was to protect them. Suddenly, Tara glanced back at them and asked why they were still standing there. She walked on talking about their experience and said they should just find Luke and listen. At that moment, Luke was casually sitting on a bench. Shortly after, he turned his head and asked Dean if he was done already. Dean stepped out of the room in his new body, but his expression was somber. He immediately began questioning it in frustration, while Luke remained calm. He even commented that he had adapted and asked if he liked his new body. This only made Dean angrier as he shouted that it was something monstrous. His arm crystallized as he complained he expected sleek armor like Wade's, but he stopped when he noticed something on his side. His eyes widened as his other arm froze over in a deep red hue. So he urged Luke to look, saying he now appeared completely distorted. Luke quickly told him to calm down, or he would lose control of the body. Dean's jaw stretched unnaturally as he repeated the words about calming down. His pupils shifted, as he demanded to know how he was supposed to do that. As soon as he spoke, his body returned to normal, and Luke praised him. Luke then said years of Nephilim experiments made his body adapt to their system. Hearing Nephilim, he asked if his form was from their modifications. His body kept healing as he wondered if it was the sacred temple's technology, but Luke replied that it was not exactly that. He looked at him and revealed that it came from a different dimension, yet he also laughed at the idea, finding it hard to believe. He said it was difficult to accept, yet he had to reconnect with the steel sphere. But as soon as he said this, Dean rushed toward him. He tried to say he regained an important memory, yet Dean was drawn to the parallel universe. He grew excited, thinking of multiverses, and asked if they could travel there. But when he asked if that world was collapsing, Luke said it was theirs instead. He added that by comic logic that place was the real world, which stunned Dean. He also said that world was without powers and remained stable, so Dean asked if that meant they were nothing more than fictional world. He replied it could be seen that way, and Dean began walking off, but he stopped when Luke said that's not entirely accurate, since he had lost a large portion of his memories. He explained their world branched off another. However, the branch existed only because of his interference. Dean concluded from the mention of the lab that everything was manipulated. He remarked it explained much as he had always felt gaps. While adjusting his clothes, he noted HQ instructions confused him, so he didn't follow. Now that they knew there were masterminds behind it all, he asked who they were. Luke said his findings were based on memory inferences and not yet certain. Thus, the ones responsible and their goals were still unclear to him. But he disclosed he was likely the one controlling the field and its development. Dean was visibly shocked at first, but quickly composed himself. He casually straightened his clothes and said he understood. Yet Luke remarked his calmness was surprising. He replied it might be due to his strange body or the flood of information. But he also admitted that instead of fear he felt excitement. With that being said, he said Luke's childlike appearance curious him. Luke explained that the child's body originally belonged to this world, so Dean asked why he did not age. He answered that the boy once had an enhanced body like Wade. He had the ability to endlessly reprogram his cells to remain young, but the temple seized him after awakening, and he turned from machine to child. Dean listened as Luke said memory wipes kept him stable. The child also let him break free, and he planned to survive and restore him. Dean remained quiet for a moment before responding. He admitted they lacked freedom as test subjects, and asked what came next. Luke replied by asking if he knew what usually happened to test subjects. He brushed his bangs aside, and said they'd be discarded once useless. He also said while fixing his hair the only option was to sabotage the experiment, so he declared that he would no longer hide his eyes. Dean noted Luke was said to run the lab, and asked how it continued without him. He then answered that a project of this scale would likely have a backup team. He even gestured to his drone, saying the overseer was the DSD head or temple leader. Suddenly, Dean admitted his own memories were broken. He noted he read both to relieve stress and to uncover what had changed. He revealed the fantasy comics were a cover, since authorities controlled all publications. Possessing ancient prints was a crime, and the guilty will vanished. Luke speculated the books hid truths authorities didn't want found. That meant they were likely involved in everything happening now. However, he caught something on his drone, and said they were in danger. He noted Ritter was returning to HQ, but sabotage railways left them no route forward. Suddenly, Dean noticed a fluffy figure, and questioned if he was hallucinating. But Luke replied Emmy had personal matters and would return soon. With no transport, they waited on the bench and discussed Dean's body. Dean noted it felt strange, and he's unsure if his body required eating or sleeping, yet Luke responded that it might not function the way he expected. He warned against strain, and began outlining ways to restore energy. Thus, Dean said he'd likely need to consume organisms with supergenes. However, Luke simplified it as consuming superhumans, so he immediately felt sick. Just then, Emmy passed behind them. They turned to look but saw nothing. Moments later, she passed by again when they looked away. They checked again as Dean insisted something had rushed past. As he concluded it was furry, Emmy shouted a monster was there. They looked at the nearby creature, and were shocked as it lunged to devour them. Luke was swallowed by it in an instant, so Dean immediately transformed to rescue him. But Luke signaled for him to stop and calmly said he was fine. Hearing this, Dean stared at him in confusion. Meanwhile, Luke addressed the person inside, and called her as Mimi. She then knelt before him, and said that the temple was in trouble. He later learned that the Nephilim had gone rogue. She said dozens crossed from the realm, and their strength is beyond 10 god. So the 10 god left with his confidants, while the rest were likely eaten by Nephilim. She told him he had warned against kindness, yet she refused to stand idle. She pressed that must stop them, but he answered he cannot. He revealed he lacked both strength and knowledge, but he's certain Higan's energy could be used against the Nephilim. He said his first move was DSD or Temple, but time was against them. However, his words about breaking the system confused her. Suddenly, Dean proposed, seizing one of them to learn the truth. He claimed he could face them now, yet Luke urged finding Luke first. So Dean wondered how to find him, and he suggested Mulrit, and she agreed. However, she asked if the wolf would join, and Luke confirmed. Emmy quickly fell silent upon hearing this, and began to panic. But Mulrit already burrowed them down, and was ready to start at their split site. Meanwhile, in a ruined area, the ground began to rumble as Wade ran around. Hence, Tara pleaded for him to slow down, yet Nisha encouraged him to quicken his pace. So, she began crying while saying they were wandering aimlessly, and that every direction looked the same to her. Half an hour ago, Tara finally relaxed, after many strange events. But he insisted daylight still held threats, and she cut him off harshly. Just then, Nisha noticed the sky darken, and the other two looked on in confusion. They saw a black hole above, and began to wonder what it was, but they were sucked in, and this made Tara curse Wade for jinxing them. Later after that, she finally woke up. She looked around and began to ask where they were. Wade confessed he hated it here, and this reminded her of Mercury retrograde. Just then, he noticed Nisha's hair turning black. She then replied that it felt as if she had been stripped of her powers. Suddenly they heard a loud shout, and quickly turned to the side, but they only saw Tara panicking over her front size.